And welcome to another episode of Picture This. We are here in August of 2024 talking about the movies of 1968. How you doing, Chad? Welcome back.
Who will buy this wonderful feeling? How's it going, Dyl?
That was great. Yeah,
Thank you.
opening up with a little bit of a song because this is a very musical and play / theater heavy slate. 4 theatrical adaptations out of 5, which is I think the most we've seen so far. Very exciting to talk about 1968. We just did 1966 and we've done 1967, so we've like lived in this land before. So it's gonna be nice to kind of just see this trend continue as we go into the 70s, which we've also covered a lot of years for. This is kind of a transitionary point in similar ways that like 72 was when we talked about that as well. So very fun. But I'm feeling like we need a third company here. I think Three's Company is the way to do this, right? Right, Chad?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
I don't know. Who can we call? Oh, we got Kelsey here. Hey, Kels.
Hey,
What's up?
Hello.
Welcome to Picture
forget
This.
about it.
Welcome.
Thank
Let me put
you.
you up there so people can see your name. They don't need to see mine. I'm all over the channel.
Oh,
Okay, now your head's cut off. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna let them see your name, and I'm gonna put it down there just so they can see your face. I don't.
okay.
I'd rather them see your
Yeah,
face
cut
than your name. They'll see
cut
your
that
name.
Yankee logo off, please.
Oh gosh,
Thank you.
no. In that case, I'm gonna stay down here. No, I mean, Kelsey, it's great to have you. When we were looking for years for you to guest on. First off, it's your birth month. Happy birth month.
Thank
That's
you.
an exciting. It was like, okay, we're gonna have Kelsey on in August. It's her birth month, and then we were thinking like, what year could Kelsey do? We're still doing our year of classics, so it's like, what year fits Kelsey, but also the classics vibe? And we found one that has 2 musicals, 2 play adaptations, and then a really pro-feminist piece. So it's like a really cool Kelsey slate, I feel. So welcome, Kelsey. How you feeling being here on Picture
Thank
This?
you. Thank you. I feel honored to be a part of this very prestigious show. I dressed up for the occasion. As
Uh-huh.
you can see, I put on my blazer. I'll chat over here. And Dill told me to pick a year before 1970, and I picked the year 1968. So, and it was the year of the 1969 Oscars. So I got real as close as I could to
Yeah, you said
current
I'm gonna
day.
be classic, but I'm not going too classic for you, Dylan. I'm gonna settle for the most recent year we could. But no, great slate. Let me tell you about the movies that we will be covering today. We are going to be covering. I cannot speak. We're going to be covering Funny Girl, The Lion in Winter, Oliver. You got to put that exclamation point on it.
Mhm.
Rachel, and Romeo and Juliet. I mean, we're
That
spanning
was
so much time.
that
Yeah.
was one movie, by the way. That was not 2 separate movies called
Yes.
Rachel.
Yes. I put the comma, put the little beat in there, but it is one title. Rachel. You got to give that little space between
Mhm. Mhm.
But it is one title.
I,
But
I
yeah,
gotta I gotta quickly throw in this. This is a pretty solid slate, and
yeah.
my ranking is it's hard. Okay,
Mm.
I got like I think I got a solid 1 and a solid 5, but that 2 through 4.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
kind of on the same path as you. I have a definitive number one that's just like one of my favorite films of all time is in this slate. So I was like, all right, that's my number one. But now figuring out 2 to 4, there were some that I had never seen before that I was like, wow, these are really good. Some that I had seen but not in a long time that I was like, am I weighing in nostalgia? Do I really like it as much as I thought I did? And some that I should have seen by now that I didn't, that I liked. But it's very surprising when a slate comes along, especially one that is so all kind of similarly revolving around the same thing. Like these are all essentially adaptations. One is a book adaptation, 2 are play adaptations, 2 are musical adaptations. So it's really cool to like kind of take that into account. We rarely get a slate with all adapted works. So it is really interesting to look at it and to try to decipher like what is the best of the best and what is like your favorite as well. Because I think this is also one that could also weigh in personal nostalgia depending on what movies you're talking about. Kels, just overall thoughts on the slate without specifying your thoughts on what the best is. Were you a fan of this slate?
I was a really big fan of this slate. I was really, really pleased with the year that I had picked. I have one clear number 5. I was
Oh,
like, oh my God, that was a big drop off because I had
mm,
watched 3 and then I watched the last 2 on the same day. And I was feeling really good after the first 3. And then there was a huge drop off at number 4. And I was like, oh my God, this is torturous.
oh no.
And then we picked it back up a little bit by the last movie, but there was a
Okay.
very clear number 5 in my ranking for sure.
I'm very fascinated because Chad said he has a clear 5. You had a clear
Yeah.
5. I was the opposite. I had a clear 1 and didn't know what to do with the
Mm.
other 4. I don't have a clear 5. My number 5 is still a film I very much like. So I'm very interested. I think I'm going to be the most positive on this slate for once, which is kind of cool. So we'll see. We'll see. Why don't we get into the year itself, Chad? As always, you like to set the scene for us. What was going on in the year of 1968 that is important for us to know? Just paint the picture, if you will, for a time that none of us lived, but the birth year of my uncle. Shout out Uncle Kirk. You rock. All right,
Nice,
Chad,
nice,
go ahead.
nice. Yeah, it's actually quite a year. It was ongoing. The Vietnam War is occurring. A lot of protest happening. Speaking of which, African American student civil rights protesters are killed by police on a college campus in South Carolina. Lyndon B. Johnson barely edges out anti-war candidate Eugene McCarthy in the Democratic primary, showing people are divided over Vietnam. The United States Congress repeals the requirement for a gold reserve to back U.S. currency. I still don't know what that means, but Lyndon B. Johnson announces that he will not be a candidate for re-election, kind of pulling a Biden there. I guess maybe Biden pulled a Lyndon B. Johnson. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated this year. The Catonsville Nine burned self-selective draft records as a protest against the Vietnam War in Catonsville, Maryland, a place I'm very familiar with. And Mattel's Hot Wheels toy cars are introduced. A radical feminist shoots Andy Warhol at the factory, but he survives. Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated, so that's another. It's a lot of political unrest in this year. The company Intel is founded, very important there for processors and whatnot. Pope Paul VI reaffirms the Catholic Church's opposition to birth control. That's not great. The first International Special Olympics Summer Games are held. That's better news. Led Zeppelin makes their first live performance. That's really cool.
Oh, I wish I was there.
Same. NBC cuts off the Raiders/Jets game to air the TV movie Heidi. A lot of people were pissed off.
Okay.
Douglas Engelbart publicly demonstrates his pioneering hypertext system and the computer mouse at what becomes retrospectively known as the mother of all demos. And Japan's biggest heist, the never solved 300 million yen robbery, occurs in Tokyo. And it was never solved. They got away with 300 million yen. It's pretty cool, huh?
How much is 300 million yen in compared to
I don't know.
US dollars? You know, that's a lot though, right?
I imagine.
Okay, yeah, I assume.
And this is back in 1968. So what was it, compared
Inflation.
to today?
Oh, yeah.
That's a very good point as well.
Wait, what was the number again? I want to know.
300 million yen.
Damn.
While you look that up, anything else, Chad, on the year 1968, or can we transition to some births, some deaths?
1 Japanese yen equals $0.0069. So it's not quite $300 million, but it's close to it, I imagine.
Yeah.
Still a lot. Anyways, we don't want to make this whole episode on that. I will talk about the births. We have a few. Hugh Jackman, he's big in the news, back as Wolverine, right? Will Smith, Celine Dion, one of my favorites, Terry Crews, Lisa Marie Presley, Tony Hawk, Owen Wilson, Kristen Chenoweth, speaking of musicals, LL Cool J, Guy Fieri, Molly Ringwald, Nardwuar, Damon Albarn, Lucy Liu, Kenny Chesney, Daniel Craig, Helen McCrory, Shaggy, Radiohead star Tom York, Josh Brolin, Gillian Anderson, Parker Posey, one of my favorites, Sean Levy, Andy Cohen, Brendan Fraser, Naomi Watts, and Gary Coleman.
Wow.
And just a few deaths, like we mentioned, Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, but also Helen Keller, John Steinbeck, and Upton Sinclair.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, a lot of great births and some sad deaths as well. But yeah, I mean, like just some of the heaviest hitters right there, like Hugh Jackman and I mean, Hugh Jackman alone is pretty big. There were other names that was on the tip of my tongue, and now I just can't think past just Hugh Jackman because that was the first name you thought of. But great, Chad. Any other albums that came? Any other? I said other. I have any albums? Yeah, sorry.
Of
any albums come out? Oh, yeah, of course. Show us.
I feel like I have more of these, but I was only able to find a few. So I have one of my favorites, Van Morrison's Astral Weeks. We have the Kinks of the Village Green Preservation Society by the Kinks. And then we have, it's hard to see a little bit, but the White Album by the Beatles. It's very white.
Okay.
Say that name very literally.
Yeah, right.
And then we also have Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix. Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, one of my favorites. White Light, White Heat by the Velvet Underground, Beggar's Banquet by the Rolling Stones, Music from the Big Pink by the Band, Bookends by Simon and Garfunkel, and At Folsom Prison by Johnny Cash. Landmark album there.
It's a great one. Yeah, great time for music. 60s are obviously a big cultural shift there, and a big change for movies. There were a lot of movies that did not make it to Oscar morning for Best Picture, but there were also plenty of great films released in 1968. As always, we do like to throw it to a guest. Kelsey, do you have any 1968 films worth bringing up for that year?
I'm so honored you asked. I was going to say I had something to contribute to this section of the show.
I love it. Go for it.
I've been studying.
Okay.
So the only movies that I can really talk on from 1968 are the following. Rosemary's Baby, which I watched for last year's 31 Frights of Halloween, which was a great film. Very spooky, made me very angry because I was very sad for Rosemary the entire time, and sad that I never saw a demonic baby. I will say that.
It's really cool that you like that one, by the way, because it's a slow burn. So I feel like it'd turn a lot of people off, but like you dug it. That's really cool.
It's one of the classics. Also an Oscar winner for Best Supporting Actress. So that's pretty.
Another horror movie from that year that I've seen, Night of the Living Dead.
Yes, which I know you love, Kelsey.
A classic.
I'm kidding. Kelsey famously doesn't love that one. Neither do I, but Chad does.
Just because of the ending. Just because of the ending.
Yeah, it's an
social
iconic
commentary of it.
Yeah. It's iconic. It's iconic.
And then the last one is one from my childhood that traumatized me to this day, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Okay, yeah. I thought you were going to say Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, because that was the one from my childhood that kind of traumatized me, because the Heffalumps and Woozles was that one, with the dream sequence where Pooh gets It's the meme of Pooh getting ascended.
Yeah.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, though, yeah, very frightening for kids. Advertised as a kids movie, but no. We're recording this late at night. So don't do that, please.
I also wanted to contribute, a la Chad as well. I wanted to talk about a little bit the Broadway season that was happening in 1968.
Please do, yeah.
Musicals in this slate. There was a lot, obviously, on Broadway in the year 1968, but I'm only going to mention the titles that I recognize, really. So we have Cyrano de Bergerac, Hair.
Yeah.
I'm skimming down this list. Promises, The Cherry Orchard. We've got and West Side Story, and the Tonys, this 1969 Tonys. The 5 musicals that were nominated were 1776, which opened in March of 1969 at the Richard Rodgers Theater, which is where Hamilton is right now. So got in right before the Tonys in April of 1969. So they opened in March. So it was 1776, Hair, Promises, and a musical I've never heard of called Zorba.
And okay, I know Zorba.
1776 won. Came in right at the buzzer and won the whole thing.
One of the unique musicals that like has long stretches with no music. Like I'm talking like 40 minutes of no music, just scene work, which is unique. You don't see that a lot with musicals nowadays. One of Matt Chapman, friend of the channel's favorite musicals. Also worth noting, Kelsey, Turkey Lurkey Time is from Promises.
Yes.
One of our favorites.
Yes,
our favorite little Christmas songs. Yeah. Great. Thank you for painting the picture there for musicals, because I love that. Maybe I might have to start. I'm gonna honor your tradition. I'll bring up musicals when we talk about other years in film, because I think that's cool. Because so many musicals get adapted to film, especially of this era, the 60s and going into like the 70s, also back in the 50s, especially with the Code era where they had to go a little safer, and if it was on stage, it was likely appropriate to be put on screen. So, but this is where we're starting to see that shift a little bit. Any other movies, Chad, from 1968 you had, in addition to Rosemary's Baby and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Night of the Living Dead?
Apparently the Producers and The Odd Couple came out that year.
Yep.
And then also for Best Picture worthy, tell me I'm wrong, 2001 A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, probably should have won Best Picture that year, if I'm being honest.
Greatest movies ever made. Yeah, I'd say at least be nominated.
Yeah, and it was nominated for Best Director, so it was clearly on their radar. They just didn't bite that bullet, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the ending was a little too weird for them. But you also have The Planet of the Apes. The OG.
Yes. Worth noting, both came out on the same day, 2001 and Planet of the Apes, which is probably the greatest day in sci-fi history, I would say. Because you get literally two of the greatest sci-fi films on the same day. You brought up most of them. I did also have another musical adaptation. Finian's Rainbow comes out in 1968, the movie. Yellow Submarine, another musical, comes out in 1968. You also have The Thomas Crown Affair, and one of my favorites, Once Upon a Time in the West, one of the greatest film scores you will ever hear, and probably my favorite Henry Fonda performance. And there are a lot of good ones, but so that's saying something, but definitely my favorite of his. So we talked about the films that didn't make the cut, but let's talk about what did make the cut as we look into Oscars. There really isn't a lot to say about the Oscars, but the thing that there is to say about the Oscars is like one of the most infamous, iconic Oscar stats ever, which is that there was a exact tie for Best Actress in the year of 1969 for the films of 68. As we know, Katharine Hepburn and Barbara Streisand tied for Best Actress at the Academy Awards, which was a hugely iconic moment, because Katharine Hepburn, of course, had just won the year before. So she was a back-to-back winner. This was her third. She would go on to win again for on Golden Pond, but this was her third. This is her first time winning an Oscar since the death of her husband, Spencer Tracy, a year before, which is also why she probably had a lot of favor going into Guess Who's Coming to Dinner the year before. But she won for that, won again this year in a back-to-back, but also Barbara Streisand, who had never been in a film before until now, also wins. So it was like a dual effort of awarding someone new and someone old all at once. It was kind of like the perfect, if you're going to have a tie, that's kind of the perfect way to do it, is someone fresh off the scene and someone very well established. Though a lot of people have some controversy because it's a tie and they say, well, that cheapens the wins. But I think it just adds for more celebration. But I get it.
Whatever.
Ties are questionable sometimes, where it's like how can you say you're the best if someone else is also the best? But hey, I think it's fun every now and then. It's fun every now and then. I like how people, I do like how we have a definitive winner every year, but if you're gonna have a tie, this is the year to do it, because there's so many great actress performances. The actor is not as deep for me, but the actresses of this slate and just of all the other movies as well. I mean, Rosemary's Baby, Mia Farrow wasn't even nominated, so like that just shows how stacked the year it was. If anything, it should have been a four-way tie, I'll tell you. We'll get to that a little bit later, but that's really the only big Oscars thing to note is the tie, but it is a big deal. We haven't seen a big tie like that happen since. We've seen a few ties since, but not in that category. The most recent tie was like sound editing in like 2013. It was like Skyfall and Zero Dark 30. So like a smaller category, a notable category. There are no small categories, but not as big a category in profile as Best Actress. But just looking at the films going into the night, it's hard to get a gauge of what was the front runner. I guess Oliver was the front runner because he's the only one of these five nominated for a BAFTA, but it is a very British film, so I don't hold that much stock in it. But Golden Globes awarded Lion and Winter and Oliver, so it was kind of a two-way battle between those two headed into the night. Those were like the two favorites to win, and Oliver squeaked it out there at the finish line. Funny Girl also nominated for the Golden Globes. Rachel, and Romeo and Juliet, not really nominated for any precursors, but were also big hits that year, obviously, with Paul Newman being attached to Rachel, Romeo and Juliet being like a timeless text. So it's easy to see why these all got nominated. But yeah, like some of the big snubs, Space Odyssey is the biggest one, I think. But also, like plenty of other notable films that got like screenplay nominations, like The Odd Couple and Rosemary's Baby, and The Producers, which won Best Screenplay. So it was a little bit shocking to see some of the snubs that year, but I think we got a overall pretty good slate of five. Any thoughts on the Oscars, on the tie? I guess we could talk about the tie when we get to the movies themselves too, because that we're going to be talking about those performances. But anything to note, Kelsey?
Well, I just have follow-up questions.
Yeah.
So did they announce their names together?
So what they did is they said it's a tie. So that was like to let everyone know. So like they didn't want to say Katharine Hepburn, and instead what they did is they said there was a tie, so people knew there would be two names. So I believe what they did is they said it's a tie, and then Katharine Hepburn actually was not in attendance, so it actually made it a little easier. She famously didn't go to the Oscars very much. She didn't like gonna go to the Oscars. Like she had a very social anxiety when it came to that. Also, her husband had just died, so she was someone who didn't really want to attend the Oscars. So I believe someone like went and got it on their behalf, and then they said Barbara Streisand, she came up as well, I believe is how it went. And then she delivered the famous line. Of course, she held the Oscar statuette and said "Hello, gorgeous," and then gave her speech, which was kind of cool. So the iconic funny girl line. But yeah, I believe they said it's a tie. And the actual vote count, there were 3,030 eligible Academy members, so it was an exact tie. I don't have the exact number, but it was an exact vote for vote tie. It wasn't like a percentage thing. It was the exact same number. So they literally had no way of breaking it, which is kind of cool. We don't see that nowadays, just because the Academy is also so much bigger that it's very rare you're going to get a tie, unless it really is so split down the middle. And even if it's split, there tends to be at least a few votes that push it one way or the other. But very interesting.
Very interesting.
Any other thoughts on the tie, or should we head right into these 5? Yeah, we're ready to go. All right. Well, let's start it off with Hello, Gorgeous. Let's talk about Funny Girl. We're starting it off with a musical with Funny Girl. Chad, tell us about Funny Girl.
Funny Girl, directed by William Wyler, written by Isabel Leonard, cinematography by Harry Stradling, music by Jules Stein and Bob Merrill, starring Barbara Streisand, Omar Sharif, Kay Medford, Anne Francis, Walter Pidgeon, Lee Allen, Mae Questrell, Gerald Moore, Frank Phelan, Mitty Lawrence, Gertrude Flynn, Penny Stanton, John Harmon, and Ruth Clifford. Synopsis: the life and career of comedian Fanny Brice, based on the 1964 musical Funny Girl.
That's right. Fanny Brice, an actual real life person, which I didn't realize until very recently, embarrassingly enough. I thought this was just a fictional story. I didn't realize it was actually based on a real woman. So that's pretty cool. Kelsey, as our guest, as our fellow female comedian, and as a musical lover, I figured we'd throw it to you first, our resident funny gal here. Kels, what do you think of Funny Girl? Did you like it? Had you seen this one before? I think this was one you had seen, right?
So I had seen this one before. This was one that my mom had shown to me when I was really, really young. So it's been a really long time since I have seen it. So there were elements of it and moments and scenes and songs and stuff that were coming back to me. But I remembered it as a totally different movie. I'm not going to lie. I really thought that the whole thing was just about like her trying to like have this huge successful career, but she gets it rather quickly. Like she really just sings like one song about it and then is immediately picked up by a producer or an agent guy who's able to kind of get her through the door almost immediately. And so I thought that it was more about the grind and like the kind of the come up of a funny woman. And I was really, really impressed that this story, coming from 1968 and even before then, like was about this just like this awkward, like this adorably awkward, like woman who knows that she's, not the prettiest woman in the room, but she can definitely be the funniest, and how she kind of really puts her own spin on things to, make things like, go in her favor. And so I was really, really, as you said, Dyl, like really, really resonating with it. I was like, oh my God, I feel so seen in this movie right now. The first thing that I noticed about it was the excellent lighting that this movie has, and how just like well lit she is the entire time. I know that sounds kind of silly, but she's just like glowing the entire time. Like even when they bounce back between the actors she was doing the scenes with, like they aren't lit the way that she's lit. You know what I mean?
I think it's something to do with the fact that this is a story about like something so pure and so young and innocent, and like kind of the loss of innocence after a time, and the maturity that she goes on, that like she is kind of bathed in this like almost like angelic, like sweet, soft light the whole time. But it is also funny because I agree with you. We've talked about it, Chad and I, when we talked about Prince of Tides, which is another Barbara Streisand directed film that she was in. She always had like her good side that she liked to be photographed on. She was very particular about how she was photographed, and I don't know necessarily how much of like the diva Barbara Streisand we got back in 1968 as compared to like the 90s, but she was very much one of those people who it was a lot about the image, despite this movie being about it not being about the image, and finding beauty through
Sure.
other things, and like excelling beyond just a pretty face, and like having
Yeah.
other attributes that make you notable and successful, which is why so many young girls I think really took to it very nicely. But I think it's very funny that you mentioned that, because she was all about her image, and shoot me on my good side. She never would like to be shown from the other angle, which I think is very diva, but also like she earns it. She's Barbara
Yeah.
Streisand. She's an iconic legend. So I just think it's funny that you mentioned the lighting, because I agree. A lot of this takes place like in like dark rooms with like a lot of great production design and beautiful like colors, and even the alleyway sequences, which are like not great colors, but there's great lighting to that as well. Like she sings so many great ballads in that alleyway, and then the way the moon just lights her. Yeah, the lighting is definitely a key element to this thing that gives it that innocence and purity. But yeah, I'll throw it over to you, Chad. What do you think of Funny Girl? This was a first watch for you, I believe, right?
Yes, this is definitely a first watch. I'm glad that I got to watch it because I did really like it. It's just one of those things to where this is a Barbara Streisand vehicle to like showcase like what she can do, and like everything she's got, and star making vehicle for her. And honestly, I'm not sure if the vehicle itself is that solid, because I mean, honestly, it's just it's like a biopic essentially. I mean, it's a adaptation of a musical, but it's essentially a biopic. So you have not just her life and her like rise to fame, but you have like this whole other story about her relationship with this guy, and how he kind of ends up just being kind of shitty over time. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that the musical sequences and Barbara singing and just being hilarious. Like I just was laughing throughout this movie until it started to get really serious. And so I was just like, I don't know. I know it's trying to like portray someone's life, so it's hard to cut out a whole thing. But I'm like, I don't know if I needed the romance bit. I don't know like how well that actually played into the story.
Right.
I would have maybe rather just seen her rise to fame.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so interesting because like that is, I actually feel very similarly to you. I think that romance is the least engaging element to me, because I was so invested in her and her journey, and I think the romance is kind of like base level. Obviously has something very interesting to say in toxic relationships, of course, and how like, I have a gambling addiction, like I'm kind of closing you out of my life, and her just kind of like reclaiming that and being like, no, like don't rain on my parade, quite literally. Like I this is my story, not yours. You're not going to dictate this for me, which I think is a powerful moment. But I think it's funny what Kelsey said. Like it almost seems like the first movie ends and then the second one begins very early, because the first movie is her rise to stardom, and it happens so quickly that I think you could have made a whole musical or movie out of that, and like have it end with like the dressing room scene of like someone coming and discovering her, giving the agent giving her the car, and like that's the big break, and it's all about her defying these stereotypes in the workplace. And then I think it does take that pivot into the romance, which I think if you're not necessarily as on board with, it does kind of lull in that second hour, which is very interesting, because I agree. I think Kelsey hit it on the nail on the head with like, it happens so quickly that like then it's not even about her career as much as it is just like, now she is famous, but like she also has this husband with this gambling addiction. It's a romance at that point. It's not about her and her place in the world. But I also think like Chad, you said it is a biopic, so like they did want to tell a full story, and I do think there is still interesting themes to be had about like how her relationship and her marriage goes. That is at least insightful and informative. It's just, I agree. I think the most entertaining stuff is in that first like half hour, 45 minutes, where we're seeing her rise. I mean, when she is quite literally a klutz, and I love that. It provides great comedy. But then when she has that moment of stardom where she comes out and the audience is just eating her up, and it's just one of those great, it sounds like one of those great stories you would hear from like your grandparents who were like, when I was young, this happened and this star was made. Like it's one of those classic stories of like, she put on she didn't even put on a fake like disguise or anything, but like she dressed a little sillier and just like had a sillier attitude, which just made it's such a refreshing scene. That scene is my favorite scene, when she like first like when the whole sold out crowd and she's like doing the silly little bit, and then I forget who plays the producer, Ziegfeld, but he's he's going crazy and he's like running backstage and he thinks it's a disaster, but then he hears the audience laughing. It's just a great setup.
because she was like pregnant or whatever, and they're like,
that's what
Yeah.
it was. She
"What?"
didn't. Okay, because
Yeah.
I was trying to remember. I didn't want to be offensive and say like, did she put on like a fake? Because this also talks a lot about the Jewish experience too, and I wasn't sure if this
Mhm.
was like if she put on like a big nose or something as like a joke, but it was the big belly. That's right. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, defying that stereotype of like the beautiful bride and like kind of poking fun at that, which I thought was
Yeah,
very fun.
that beginning stuff really worked for me, and I was so there for like, you know, her being funny and all that stuff. But like it's just because you talked about like the whole toxic relationship stuff that happens, which can be interesting, but it feels like after she does the "Don't Rain on My Parade," then it keeps going into the whole her pining after this guy, and I think it ends that way too, with her like him going to jail and her like, you know, pining after him and stuff. But like in the beginning, it's like really great because I love like what it has to say about, you know, like beauty and beauty standards, and then also like, you know, because even today we still have a whole stigma about like female comedians and how like they're not respected as much as like, you know, male comedians, and that's changing. But you see, even back in 1968, Barbara Streisand was hilarious. Like I was laughing my ass off watching this movie. And then yeah, Carrie and I were watching this, and when the one guy's like, you know, uh kicking her out like because she doesn't look conventionally pretty and she doesn't all this stuff, and then we're sitting there like, is this movie trying to say Barbara Streisand is
Right.
ugly? Like
I think
she's pretty in this. What are you
I think that
talking
is the least
about?
convincing
Yeah.
element of any version of Funny Girl I've ever seen, with like Leah Michele, Beanie Feldstein, Julia Benko. This one, I was like, Fanny Bryce is never not beautiful. So like, I don't.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's one of those like you have to like suspend your disbelief type things. And this was her vehicle from the start. She was the original on Broadway, and they actually were gonna make this into a movie.
Right.
And the producer literally said, if it's not Barbara, I'm not doing it. And another producer was like, we want Shirley MacLaine. And he was like, it's not Barbara, we're not doing it. And I love how he stood his ground. This is her first role, but it's
and
because
that worked out here. It didn't work out so much for like Dear Evan Hansen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a bad example of it. Yeah, but
Right.
no, but it is very very interesting to see. Like this was a role that she had like really made one and like it was a part of her at this point. So then you throw her in this, and she's already got such a great grasp on the character that she can go even further. And I think her character work is really what sells this movie for me, at least. Yeah.
And also like the just listening afterwards to the soundtrack is incredible. You'll be laughing just listening to the soundtrack. It's so funny and good.
Yeah, great music. Yeah, Kels?
Yeah, like you guys have been saying, the whole second act of this movie is like a total drop off, just because it really does become about Nikki Arnstein. And this is what I meant before when I said that I had remembered this movie an entirely different way. This entire time, up until whenever I watched this movie, like two weeks ago, I had thought that like "Don't Rain on My Parade" was about her singing to like producers, being like, "No, like I'm a great star, and you're gonna want to cast me and love me." No, she's singing about how she's going to go get this boyfriend, and I'm literally watching this, and I'm like, what? Why are you throwing away? Oh, I wanted to hit this woman when she's in the middle of the tour. And they're we're getting ready to go to Chicago. Oh no, I'm not going to Chicago. I just called Zegfield. I'm going to get this boyfriend. I'm literally like, oh girl, you worked your whole life for this, and you're gonna throw it away for this guy. So then she, and that brings me to my next point. "Don't Rain on My Parade." What a shitty scene. I'm so sorry.
I thought you were gonna say shitty song, and I was gonna tell you, Kels. I was like, we may have to book another guest for the last 4 films.
Like her on the yacht or whatever, or not the yacht, the boat.
She gets on like a train or a boat. Yeah,
yeah, she gets on a boat. And it's like all these like faraway shots of like, I'm sure the cameraman's on some kind of like helicopter or something above her. And I just wish that it was just like her just like standing and singing, and like really, us being able to see like all the emotions that go along and the power that goes along with this song. And they just picked the worst way to convey it to the audience. And I hated it. I was like, that was "Don't Rain on My Parade." I watched the whole movie for this show-stopping number, and that was it.
It's almost like they could have like had her sing that and then travel to meet him.
Yeah,
it's very funny because I actually saw this. I don't know if Kelsey you saw this too, but I saw it on Broadway last year when it was on Broadway.
No, I wanted
I
to
went
so
to
bad.
see, I was gonna go see it with Leah Michelle, but it was actually cheaper to see her understudy, and her understudy Julie Benko was phenomenal, so good. But this is the Act 1 closer, and I think there's something that we tend to forget with musicals is that musicals have intermissions not just to give the audience time to like get their snacks and pee and like debrief and breathe, but like it's designed to where the end of Act 1 is supposed to stick with you. And I think with every musical adaptation that I've seen that doesn't have an intermission, it's really hard to like just have that firm statement and then just continue moving on. And I almost wonder if they made it more of like a big kind of wider scoped version of that song because it was going to keep going, because this wasn't the end of Act 1. You know, I wonder if maybe they kind of made it less definitive, because I feel like on stage it ends and the curtain closes and you're riled up going into Act 2. You're like, hell yeah, Fanny Bryce. And here it's like, like it was a very weird staging. I agree with you, Kels, because I think it has that very Act 1 finale like quality that like in movies, and I think this is something that, and I like the film, but I know Chad doesn't. But like Les Mis, the movie Les Mis, they have One Day More, and then the action just keeps going. And like that is a song that deserves, like, after One Day More happens, you need 15 minutes to sit and just like bathe in its glory. And it's like, no, we can't, because it's a movie. We got to keep going. And it does feel weird at times with that. And I feel like with movie musicals, the ones that do it really well really find a good way to transition, but the ones that sometimes fumble are the ones that it's like, it almost feels like it's absent because there's no applause as is, which is weird to hear at the end of a musical number. Like, it's already weird enough that there's no applause, but then you just continue the action. And I agree with you. I think it's just a weird, it feels weirder in the context of the movie than it does in the show. And in the show, it really sticks and it really hits. I haven't seen the original, obviously, but like, I'm sure it did as well. But it definitely did in the revival. So I just think it's very interesting how, when we adapt musicals to film, like how much of the actual like power of like a definitive beat of a song is diminished because you have to continue the action rather than taking the time to have an applause break or have a blackout or have an intermission, which I just think is especially noticeable in this film, because it felt like a weird transition then afterward as well. And it also helps break it up, like the first story and the second story in the movie, in the musical, that I don't think you get in this necessarily.
Yeah. And thank God at the end, she has this line at the end when he gets out of prison and she sits him down and she's like, listen, if we're going to give this another go, I'm going to have to give up the show. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, if she gives this guy another try, I'm going to lose it. And then she goes, but I'm not going to do that, or whatever she says. And I literally, the breath, the audible like sigh of relief. I'm sure you guys heard it around the world. It was like, I literally went, oh, thank God. Like I was so happy that she stuck with, the thing that she worked her whole life to do, instead of going back to this schmuck who has a gambling problem.
Yeah. Which I think is what helps with the feminist messaging of it, though. I think that's why ultimately this has been such a cultural touchstone for not just women, but especially Jewish women as well, or just women in entertainment who aren't as conventionally pretty, even though, again, as Chad said, Barbra Streisand, like, hard example to make out of, but I do think that's why it has had its staying power, because at least it does end in that way, which is good. But yeah, I'm glad we're all on the same page, because I was worried I'd be having to like, I'd be the one trying to climb that uphill battle. But it seems like we're all kind of on agreement in that lens. Like, it is still very good. It's very enjoyable. The songs, as Chad said, are very good. Like, when she sings My Man, it's just like, I mean, if you're not crying, you don't have a soul.
And,
it's so beautiful.
The People song, and there's just so many great ones. Yeah. And honestly, I just
iconic. Yeah. It's the melodies.
Totally iconic. I really want to see that musical, but I just think she's a great character. So I think this movie would have worked, regardless of what kind of story you have. If you just had her rising to fame, or if you have the love story too, I think it works ultimately. It's just not as great as I would have hoped. And, but that's okay. It's one I still will go back to and watch, just to see Barbara being hilarious and singing great. So.
Any other thoughts on Funny Girl, Kels?
Yes. Chad said People Who Need People, which was my favorite scene. I did make a note of that. There's that great shot of them right before she starts singing, where she's sitting on the staircase and he's kind of like leaning over the railing, and then the railing splits the screen. I just like really love that shot. I was eating up that shot.
Absolutely.
And the whole scene is lit really well. When she first gets off the train right before, Don't Rain on My Parade, where she runs into him again and she's like, oh, well, I wasn't looking for you, or like whatever. There's this great shot of her profile where she just like looks up and she's got the hat on, and I was like, ooh, this is cinema.
I'm telling you, she's got the most iconic profile of any actress ever.
Yeah.
Just like, she's all about that. I love it.
But Dill, I also wanted to say something about My Man, because I watched this with our friend James, and he told me an interesting fact about the musical and about how they cut that song because they felt that that song took away from the fact that she had just, chosen herself at the end of all of this. And what, she's going to sing the song about like being in love with this guy still,
Right.
where I took it as, no, she was always going to sing this song because it's part of the show, right? It's part of the act that she's doing. But now it's so much harder. And the dynamic and the turmoil of her just having the biggest breakup of her life to now singing a song about how much she's in love with this person. Like that was such a strong choice, I think. And I don't think that the musical should have cut it, because I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah,
I don't think she was saying like, oh, I'm still in love with him and I'm still pining for him. I think she's like acknowledging that she did have a love for this person, but she realizes she has to let him go.
Absolutely. No, that's a great observation. Yeah, the most recent revival, we should clarify, is the one that cut it. I believe it's from the original musical, and then when they revised it, they had cut it out. And the reason I just want to go back really quickly to your "Don't Rain on My Parade" feeling of like why you had this Mandela effect of why you thought she was singing it to like win the affection of Broadway producers. It's because in Glee, that's what happens to Rachel Berry. When she's trying to audition for the school, she's singing that song to get their attention. She sings it like 5 times in that show because that's like her go-to song. She sings it at like the regionals, and then she sings it at nationals. She sings it for the NIADA, which is not a real school, but like the NIADA professors. And then like when she's auditioning for it on Broadway, she sings it, and then she ends up getting the role, which is funny because then Lea Michele went to play the role again on Broadway, which it's also a role that they say is the role Barbra Streisand was born to play. It is, but it's also the role Lea Michele was born to play. They both, I think Lea Michele did a great job with it as well. But it's that kind of role. Like any actress would be lucky to tap into it because it's got just great songs, great acting beats, and like Chad said, some great humor as well.
Speaking of iconic too, just one thought that I had when I was watching the movie was that the SNL sketch, I believe, Superstar with Molly Shannon must have been based off of this. Because when I was watching Funny Girl, I was like, this is like Superstar.
Yeah, no, it very well could be. But yeah, Funny Girl, it hasn't necessarily aged as well as we would have hoped, but we all are still enjoying Funny Girl here. It only wins one of its 8 Oscars it's nominated for, but it is a big one. It is Best Actress, of course, for Barbra Streisand. Her first film role coming off of the stage. I believe she won the Tony for it, came in, won the Oscar for it as well. It was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actress for her mother, Kay Medford. Best Score of a Musical Picture. Best Song, it's hard because all these songs did exist. So the only original song it was eligible for was the song Funny Girl, which they wrote for the movie. It was nominated, did not win. It was also nominated for Best Sound. Here we go with the lighting. It was nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Film Editing. So it was quite a bunch of Oscars it won, but she did win, but she did tie. And who'd she tie with? No other than the legend herself, Katharine Hepburn. It is time to talk about The Lion in Winter. That was my best Katharine Hepburn impression. It wasn't great. Chad, talk about The Lion. All you have to do is have a little bit of gravitas in your voice. All right, Chad, talk about The Lion in Winter.
All right. The Lion in Winter, directed by Anthony Harvey, written by James Goldman, cinematography by Douglas Slocum, music by John Barry, starring Peter O'Toole, Katharine Hepburn, Anthony Hopkins, John Castle, Nigel Terry, Timothy Dalton. I was surprised when I saw how it was Timothy. That's Timothy Dalton. Jane Marrow, Nigel Stock, Kenneth Ives, and O.Z. Whitehead. Synopsis: Henry II of England and his attempt to establish a line of succession during a family gathering at Christmas 1183. Based on the 1966 play The Lion in Winter by James Goldman.
There you go. Christmas film, Chad. How about that? Yeah, very exciting. It's funny. I want to open this one because I think it's very funny. We talked about 66 last month, and there were 2 films that we enjoyed in that slate. Chad and I's number one was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is just about 2 people who are married but fucking hate each other. And then we also covered Malcolm's favorite movie of that slate, which was A Man for All Seasons, which is all about all these like political betrayals and underground, like talking through corridors and castles and scheming against the family. And then we get this movie, which is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Two people who hate each other while also scheming in castles and corridors and planning their family's revolutions. It was just such a cool marriage. I was like, wait, I just saw both these movies, and now it's like this perfect hybrid. Even though the play obviously had come out before, that those films were, widely culturally celebrated. I just think it's funny. Like, I guess this was just the kind of movie at the time in the late 60s that they really loved. These movies about these two, like a star vehicle where you could put two of the greatest actors ever living in a movie that just can just go at each other for 2 hours and just hate each other, be despicable toward one another, but also like, let's also dress this shit up and make it look like the most lavish, beautifully set, dressed period piece as well. So I just thought it was a cool marriage. That was the first thing I noticed about this film. But was this a first watch for everyone here? Everyone had not seen this one? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll start with you this time, Chad. Having we've covered a bunch of Katharine Hepburn now. We've covered two of her other wins. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and then on Golden Pond. So this is another Katharine Hepburn one that we're covering. Going to cover many more of hers as well. But what did you think of The Lion in Winter, Chad, as a Christmas fiend?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the Christmas stuff. I love that it takes place there. I think it like plays like a little bit into the story, not like too much. I guess like
it's merely a setting. Yeah.
But like when I started this, I was like, I'm probably not going to get into this because I didn't love A Man for All Seasons. I just already don't love that style of like, 1183, kings and squires, and I'm just like, I don't care. But I will say there was a pivotal moment that made me go, oh, this is kind of different. And then I like went all the way back to the beginning and just started watching it again, just to like kind of visit a lot of the stuff that I just wasn't into before. And then I really got into it and I really liked this one. I thought this one was pretty good. I like how it's like you got three different brothers or father. His like wife that they're still married, but they don't live together anymore. And they're fighting over like this French territory. And then you got like a French like nobleman guy, royalty who comes. And then you have who's the other player? The other player is like his like lady that he's gonna marry or something.
Yeah,
and
it's weird. She's not really a niece, but kind of like that. Like Katharine Hepburn did like raise her, so it's a little weird.
Mm-hmm. It is very weird.
It's a little weird, but again, very.
But it's 1183
time, and yeah, I mean it's 1183. But it is something we see a lot of in this style of movie, where it's like the king is this is the pretty young girl, and you're just the old haggard wife.
And it's cool how that plays into the whole thing because you have like her talking to Katharine Hepburn, who's older, and like she's like jealous of the younger lady, but then like she was once the same kind of younger lady that was kind of like the same thing, and so she went through the same kind of experience that she's going through, but they hate each other, but they relate to each other. And then you have all the brothers who are kind of like, I don't know, fighting over, being a king. And then you have, well, except for the one guy who just really doesn't seem to care all that much. The middle one, I guess. And then you have like one of the lady wants the older one, Anthony Hopkins, to have the throne. And then the king wants the younger one, but he's kind of a buffoon and doesn't really know what he's doing. And then the thing that I talked about that brought me into the movie was the whole story where Anthony Hopkins' character is gay. Mm-hmm. And when I started to realize that, like, he wasn't just having a regular conversation with the French king or the French royalty, I was like, or Timothy Dalton, I was like, uh-oh. And then it like started like having like these shots that were like really conveying that, and like him hidden, and then like part of his face is hidden in darkness and part in light, and you're like this is getting really interesting. Mm-hmm. And then how that plays into like his father disowning him, and then disowning everyone, saying I have no sons, and then she's like, you have too many sons. I don't know, I loved a lot of the dialogue in it too. I thought was really interesting, and some of the lines I actually wrote down was well, what should we hang, the holly or each other? Was a really funny one. And then
use that in your next Christmas party, see how that goes over.
Exactly. And then you have of course he has a knife. He always has a knife. We all have knives. It's 1183 and we're barbarians. I just thought that was like really meta and like really funny too. So Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole just having great lines.
Yeah.
And this
they don't need daggers though. It's that's the thing. The dialogues is their daggers. It's the weapons are the words.
Yeah.
And I just think if you're gonna have two actors to deliver it, I mean, come on. Like if Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn, probably the two greatest living actors at that time,
it's it's so much intrigue and stuff. I felt like I was watching a mini like Game of Thrones episode.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, I want the Aquitaine. And it's like, okay, well, you're gonna make sure that Richard is the king of the place, and and stuff. That's the deal, right? And then they just go back, but their whole marriage plays into it as well. And it's like a whole thing of like jealousy and hatred, but also love, and all of the stuff plays into it. I just think it's just really interesting. And actually, this is one. A Man for All Seasons wasn't one that I felt like I'd probably have to go back and rewatch at some point, but this is one I kind of want to. Maybe around Christmas time.
Yeah, maybe you got to stage the play in your own house. Have like a bunch of people over and have them read all the parts because this is a play. Kelsey, what do you think of The Lion in Winter?
I
sorry, go ahead. The
honestly,
I think has me guessing what this might lead to, but keep going.
Honestly, the way Chad just talked about it, I kind of want to give it another chance because I just like couldn't. Guys, I think this was the longest movie I've ever watched. Like I felt like I was watching it for days. Like I had to check the clock and I had to check and make sure the sun was still out when I was in my house. I'm like, how long have I been sitting in this one spot watching this movie? Yeah, it was definitely not something made for me. I don't know. It was just one of those movies that made me feel like, am I not like an intellect enough to enjoy cinema like this? I don't know.
That.
What I will say is that the humor is what I kind of grabbed onto the most, just because it was very quippy, especially Katharine Hepburn's character. And so I did write down this one quote that she says where she goes, "Quiet, dear, mommy's fighting."
Yeah, she's having such a brat girl summer. She's just so you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
People watching this podcast or listening to this podcast 2 years from now will be like, oh, okay, so they recorded this in summer of 2024. I really think she's just like eating everything up, and that's what I said. Like the weapons are the dialogue, because they keep just doing it, like giving it at one another, and it's always hits, and you're like, oh, there's a zinger, that one stung. But there's also kind of like Virginia Woolf, Chad, there's also that element of like, then they'll start like reminiscing and like being like, and I loved you once, and I'm like, oh my god, like what is going on? It's like watching a really really uncomfortable like couple fight, but one that's still together where they do reconcile. But here they reconcile, but then they're immediately back to like, you suck. It's very very interesting. But yeah, a lot of it is. I agree with you, Kelsey. There's a lot of humor there.
Yeah, and so then one of my favorite characters was the character of John, who's just kind of like bumbling around, just like having, he's just like trying to keep up, and everyone's just dismissing him the whole time. He looks a wreck, like his hair isn't put together, and his like, he just is the obvious like standout amongst the sons. And he has a great line too, where he goes, "Poor John, not everyone cry at once." And so
he was great in the movie. I agree.
I mean, just for the most part, I have this one note that says, okay, this movie is the most boring parts of running a kingdom. It's all talk and like none of the exciting stuff. Like it's talk about like war, and like we really only get that one action scene in the beginning where like the two, I almost called them tribes. That's not correct.
You do get Richard chasing John around a table once.
Oh yeah, right. How could I forget that, Chad? Thank you so much.
I'm sure she thought about it every day since watching it.
But
no, but
yeah.
well, and that's the thing with it being a play too, is like
Yeah.
you're literally, it's a play is all dialogue. There's no action really. I mean,
Right.
unless you're like going to like a huge spectacle like play or even like Shakespeare, like you really won't have a ton of like fighting necessarily that is not verbal. But I think that's actually kind of a cool change of pace for something like this, because you would expect swords and shields and medieval and
Right.
horseback, and but I like the refreshingness of it not being set like that. But I agree with you. I think it definitely, if you're not as much, if you need a break from the conversation in the dialogue, it definitely doesn't have that kind of levity that you would wish for, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it has like a little pacing issues. If like you're not into the dialogue,
You think?
then I could see it. Yeah.
No, but it's
Yeah.
also very interesting, because I think when it does lull, I think it knows. I think it kind of acknowledges like, oh, we're in a lull now. Okay, start fighting, go. Like it's almost like it's very fascinating to me. It's almost like when you're watching like a football game and there's so many timeouts and you're like, all right, and then like a really exciting like 5 minutes of football like drive happens and you're like, okay, I'm back in, and then it's like, all right, now I'm just waiting and there's a kickoff. Like it felt like watching, it feels like watching a sporting event with words. Like it's kind of like you're waiting, and then now they're fighting, you gotta lean in. All right, now I can sit back, and now they're fighting, I can lean in. Like it was just, I actually thought the pacing was great, because it did kind of have it acknowledged when it was lulling, and then it immediately jolts back up. And I think it's also because I was just like feasting on the acting of this thing. I was just like, wow, like Katharine Hepburn is just so freaking great. I mean, Peter O'Toole is also, but like Katharine Hepburn, there's a really sad story. She like, for a movie she had to like jump in a river, and they wanted a stunt double to do it. They told her she didn't actually have to do it, but instead she decided to just do it herself. She was like the Tom Cruise of her time, wanted to jump in this river or whatever, and it actually like fucked up her eyesight and her eyes, and that's why she's always got this like teary-eyed quality to her. She had like a really permanent eye damage, but it gives her this like really like magnetic quality where it almost looks like she's always on the verge of tears, because she's so distraught with emotion. That really works, especially for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was the year before, where she's like quite literally grappling with something really big, as like her daughter brings home this man that she has these biases toward, and it's a really effective picture on racism. But here especially also, it's like she is also fighting for so much, and you understand where these characters are coming from. That's the thing, it's not very one-sided. You understand each person's point of view, even though I think you would normally side with her over him, because he's in it for a lot of selfish reasons as well. Like he wants to marry off this girl, his mistress, to one of his sons, who, as Chad mentioned, is gay. So it's like also that dilemma. But I also think it's like she just has this quality whenever she's like talking to him. There's that like longingness that you get from her eyes being all so watery that's like, it's heartbreaking. And it's also just like this woman who the year before was in a movie with her husband Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy passes away, and then she quite literally doesn't know what to do with herself, and she's just so overcome with emotion. All she knows is her work and her acting, and she goes back to it so quickly that everyone was like, wow, she's already making another movie, like, is this too soon? And she knocks out of the park, wins the Oscar for it. It's a really triumphant moment. So I think it's a really powerful performance from her, especially. But what were you laughing at, Chad?
I keep thinking about the movie and how like even when you have like the long drawn out sequences, like after he goes like, I have no sons, and he like leaves the sons. I think, is this before? I can't remember if this is before or after he like locks them in the dungeon or whatever. But he's like walking away for like a long time. It felt like 10 minutes of him just like sad about his sons, and like one's gay, and oh man, can't have that in 1183. And then, he's just like, sulking down the stairs. The dog that's in the scene goes like up and down the stairs like a couple times. It's like, what's this guy's problem? And then like, I don't know, it's just like it's so drawn out that I just find it really funny. And then every single time that Katharine Hepburn brings up that she may or may not have slept with his dad, and he's just like, say it, is it true? And
yeah, it's like her like party trick, but like the bad party trick where like that's always in her back pocket to use, which is like it's fucked up. And that's the thing, it's fucked up. You have to, and I think that's where some of the humor comes from too. You have to laugh at the fact that this is a very toxic relationship, I brought it up with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or sorry, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf last month, Chad, but like it's the Michael and Jan dinner party sequence. It's like you can't like not lean in and want to see it, but you're also like, I don't want to intrude. This is making me uncomfortable. And I love how all the kids really don't care. Like they care, but they're not, this isn't about them. It's their parents fighting over it. The kids couldn't care less. At least some of them couldn't. That's where it's so different from like King Lear, which I know Kelsey and I know very well because we did a parody of King Lear our senior year of high school. But that's all about the kids fighting to be the heir, like basically fighting one another to be like the king's greatest daughter. Here it's like, no, like the kids are like, guys, like the parents are the ones duking it out, which I think is like kind of a cool role reversal as opposed to like something like King Lear. But yeah.
And I just think like all the characters are just really like well written. Like they all seem distinct from each other. The three sons don't feel like they are like one thing. They're just so different. But I think because we've shown like so many similarities between this and Virginia Woolf. Have you seen Virginia Woolf, Kelsey?
I have not.
I think you would like that one more. It's similar, but I feel like it's more like fascinating and less.
It's more modernized too.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Also worth noting, you did say like the acting and the performances and the characters, but like this is Anthony Hopkins' first film role, like his first major film role, which is huge. And he ended up being like he is one of the greatest actors of all time. And then he's also with Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, who are also two of the most iconic. Kelsey, did you realize Peter O'Toole is the guy who plays the critic in Ratatouille?
Oh
no,
yeah,
no.
In case you were like, how do I know him? I mean, he was also Lawrence of Arabia, but he was he's Anton Ego is his final role in Ratatouille.
Ego, yeah.
But like as soon as he started talking, I was like, that voice, I love that voice.
Okay.
And then Timothy Dalton, of course, James Bond, also voiced Mr. Pricklepants in the Toy Story franchise, the little hedgehog who does Shakespeare. So his first role as well, his actual film debut. So yeah, just so many great actors, so many great. What, Chad?
The Prickle Pants. It's funny.
Well, I gotta get some context to like our generation.
Yeah.
That's what I was like. I was bringing the Pixar roles into it. I mean, Peter O'Toole.
The
That's just
a
so
funny
versatile
character.
there. James, he does James Bond. He does this. He does Prickle Pants. Peter O'Toole does this. He does Lawrence of Arabia. He does Ratatouille. I mean, the versatility.
Yeah.
Man. Katharine Hepburn was still around. Who's to say she wouldn't be one of the Cars in Cars? Speaking of, we'll get to another figure soon who was one of the voices of Cars, but that's not the next film, so I can't do the immediate segue. But any other thoughts on The Lion in Winter? No lions in Lion in Winter. A little odd.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you bring up all the different actors, Dyl, because in my head, like Katharine Hepburn is from so long ago, and Anthony Hopkins is not that old. So to have them like cross on the same timeline was like weird. I was like, oh no, like Katharine Hepburn, like they should not have ever crossed paths ever in my mind. But they totally existed during the same time. I don't know why.
You want to know what the earliest Katharine Hepburn film we're going to cover on Picture This is? It's like Little Women from 1933. Like she was around for so long. But again, it's kind of cool because it's like she wins her first Oscar for I believe it's I forget the name of the first film she wins for, but it's in like the 30s. It's Morning Glory, which is her third film in 1933, which is also I think we'll cover on Picture This. But she doesn't win again till 1967 for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and then wins again in 1968, and then wins again in 1981. So it's like she wins 3 of her 4 Oscars. She's the only person ever to win 4 Oscars for acting. She wins 3 of her 4 in like the last 10 years of her career, which is just so fascinating to me. It goes to show like, no one's ever done. Like I see Emma Stone has 2 now. Like who's to say she won't have 5 or 6? If she has a career as long.
Probably
or even like look at like Meryl. Meryl has 3 now. She does one great role again, like that gets an Oscar. Like it shows that people can win Oscars no matter where they are in their careers, and sometimes you can go literally 60 years between them. So I just think that's fascinating. Or 30 years, I guess. 30 to 60, but still. Yeah,
I totally get though where Kelsey is coming from about the age thing, because it's like when you see someone who's like, you know them as like a really old person, but then you watch a performance where they're like the same age as you are now, and you're just like they just don't feel like they're that young. They feel older even in this role, and it's weird. And watching this movie, I had such a hard time believing. I was like, I know for a fact because it says that that's Anthony Hopkins and that's Timothy Dalton, but they're so young. Their faces are not shaped the way I'm used to, so I don't understand this right now.
Yeah.
Maybe if he had like made eat some his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, it would have been a little bit more believable. And did the Hannibal Lecter. No, I don't know. Sorry. Let's talk about the Oscars though that it won. It was nominated for 7 Oscars. Lion in Winter. It wins 3. It wins, of course, in a tie for Best Actress with Katharine Hepburn, with Barbara Streisand. It wins Best Adapted Screenplay. So all of these films are adapted. This is the one though that wins for its adapted screenplay and wins Best Non-Musical Original Score. So score from a movie that's not a musical. Is also nominated for picture, nominated for director for Anthony Harvey, Best Actor for Peter O'Toole, and Best Costume Design. So we're I don't know how to segue here from a very old kind of British historical English play to a little bit more modern British musical. Why don't we stay in the land of England and talk about Oliver? Chad, I'm a little too proper. I need to go with Cockney here. Let's talk about Oliver. Go ahead, Chad.
I thought you could have just been like, Oliver, tell me about Oliver. Oliver. Directed by Carol Reed. Written by Vernon Harris. Cinematography by Oswald Morris. Musical by Lionel Bart and John Green. Starring Mark Lester, Ron Moody, Jack Wilde, Oliver Reed, Shani Wallace, Harry Sicome, Joseph O'Connor, Hugh Griffith, Peggy Mount, Leonard Rossiter, and Hilda Baker. Synopsis: a little orphan boy wants to find a home. Based on the 1937 novel Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens and the 1960 musical Oliver by Lionel Bart.
That's right. A musical that I have had the privilege of being in. Before we started recording, I was talking a little bit about my days. I played Noah Claypole, the asshole at the funeral parlor who's like, "You don't have a mom, you don't have a dad," and he's just like, "Fuck you!" It starts like hitting him.
He's like, "Your mom's a whore."
Yeah, he's a sweet little like 6-year-old boy that's like beating on.
Has a direct quote.
Yeah, your mom's a whore. I think so, right?
No, I don't think so at all.
I wouldn't hold it past Noah Claypole.
They say it in like an old timey way. Yeah. They're like, "Your mom's been doing something, and she's been wearing her panties backwards or something." Like there's some like edgy little phrase for it.
Your mom's been under the covers now. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll just say right now, as much as I hope we're not making a mockery of it, but just the accents in this film, Cockney accents are so infectious. I love a Cockney accent. I love it so much. I love a proper British accent as well. It's very lovely to hear on the voice. Yeah, Emma Watson's, if you will. But then when you get to Cockney, and it just got all them like you had the marbles in your mouth, and you're just talking like this. I love it. It was my favorite accent to study in dialect class. I love Cockney. So being in that show as like a 7th grader or whatever, and like just getting to like live with those accents and the voices, and then see this movie. It's so British and so Cockney and so Dickens, but it is a lot of fun. Kelsey, had you seen the movie Oliver before, or just the musical?
Oh, Dyl.
Okay, tell us.
Had I seen the movie?
Sounds like a story time.
Strangely enough, okay, for some reason, whenever my friend Jess, you see her at my birthday every year.
Yeah.
Whenever we grew up down the street together. We grew up down the street from each other. Whenever we had a sleepover, they were always at her house. I don't know why, but like our movie of choice was Oliver.
Wow.
Every single time. Like we would get like it would be time for bed, and we would like, she had one of those like trundle beds, so there would be like the pull out bed from underneath like her little twin bed. So I'd be like all snuggled in the trundle bed. She'd be up on her bed.
Almost like that the Hagrid motorbike with Harry on the side.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we would just pop in Oliver. So I literally hadn't watched it since I slept at Jess's house from way back in the day.
Okay.
And I was having such crazy nostalgia during the entire thing. I was like, oh my God, this is all being like dug out of the recesses of my mind. Like my subconscious was just like crazy trigger during all of it.
Wow.
And it was very fun. Strangely enough, I wrote this down, like especially during Consider Yourself, which I think is like the best number in the show.
It's debatable, but like I would agree.
It's a really, really solid like spectacle that happens during that number. And it was kind of kind of reminding me a little bit of like Beauty and the Beast almost, where it's like the opening number where she's like walking through town and she's like singing about this guy and that guy and, like
Yeah.
whatever. And there's all these different moments in the song kind of thing where it's just like, but it was like that. It was that animated, like magical opening scene, but like brought to life with people and choreography and all these like funny little moments of like the kids up in the chimney and, the guys at the fish market
The
doing
kids
the
in the
fish
chimney are
and
going. Yeah.
oh my god, it was so good. This one you're just watching it and it's like so full of like great costumes and like textures and colors, and it has some like low lows but has some really fun highs and really great music and great performances. And oh my god, I think this might be one of my Letterboxd top 4s.
Wow. Honestly, I don't blame you, because I when I think of Oliver, I think of my fond memories being in Oliver and enjoying that, living in that world and stuff. But like, admittedly, when you're in a show and you hear "Consider Yourself" every day, 5 times a day, over and over, it gets a
Right.
little, like, or "Who Will Buy," "Who Will Buy," and then like the freaking "Where Is Love," like those songs kind
Yeah,
of grate
yeah.
on you after a while. But having been removed from it, I mean, you bring up nostalgia. I have so much nostalgia that I own this on VHS and DVD. I don't even own it on Blu-ray, but I was like, I have these too, and I'm like, I must have been a huge Oliver kid as well, because I have all this, and like, I
Yeah.
remember distinctly watching this as a kid as well. Just because, again, it's rated G too. It's one of the few Best Picture winners to have that G rating, even though I think
Yeah.
it gets a little dark. I mean, it's also
Yeah.
about like
Oh
abuse and
yeah.
rape, so like, I don't know,
Mm.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those movies though that I feel like has that nostalgia to it that I am immediately brought back to my childhood, like you said. Chad, this was a first watch for you as well, right? So I would
Mhm.
love to hear your perspective as someone who is just discovering it. I don't know if you've read the book or not, but we have covered Oliver and
Mhm.
Company on our Disney rankings, so
Mhm.
you have at least heard this story before.
Yeah.
But what were your thoughts on Oliver? Oh, sorry, Oliver, with an exclamation point.
Yeah, I mean, I was familiar with like some of the story, not like the whole thing.
Mhm.
Mostly like my familiarity with the movie was just the I want some more, just
Yeah,
that. That's all I knew
right.
about this actual story and movie.
Which is all
Um,
in the first like 2 minutes anyway, so there's still so much more to explore after that, which is fun. Must have been fun.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I found out I adore this. I love this movie so much. It's one where yeah, I don't know. It would be hard to pick just a favorite sequence, like even or a musical number or anything.
Mhm.
I love the one Kelsey brought up. I love the whole sequence in the square when he's just watching people selling stuff,
Yeah, who
who
will
will
buy?
buy my roses and all
Mhm.
that stuff. And then it gets really big and lavish and he's just watching them and happy, and then he's about to not be happy for a little bit. But then it ends really great with him finding his family. It's very Sorcerer's Stone in that
Yeah.
way, like found his
Mhm.
home.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Yeah, Harry Potter's a play on Oliver, it feels like too.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
and
Orphan finds his found family despite going through the trials and tribulations of trying to navigate and think he's in
Yeah.
his family. Yeah, no, yeah, 100%. Same with like Annie as well. Like it's the classic orphan story, but I think there's a reason those all end the same way, is because if you watch the story that doesn't end with the orphan finding a home, it's incredibly depressing, and I think this movie already has
Right.
enough depressing endings that if that didn't happen, I think it'd be severely like a big severe bummer. So I'm glad they do have this like really sweet moment at the end. I'm glad movies like this have that.
Yeah, there is some really great stuff at the end because it does get really dark and like the stakes are high and you think it could have a really negative ending and you're like, is there enough time in this movie for like
Mhm.
a sweet ending? But then you do get like the Bill Sykes not winning, and I think he dies right there, doesn't he?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
you have the Artful Dodger pulling a last little like sneaking, a
Yeah,
steal. You
yeah,
got to pick a pocket or two. Am I right?
yeah.
And then you have the very great ending. I don't know. It's weird because like this feels like a movie I wish would have been a childhood movie for me, but it's just
Mhm.
one I never really came across. And it's one that I want to now pass down and like watch it a lot with Elliot when he gets older. And so it could be like one of his big childhood movies,
Mhm.
because it's like it's so great, just like, seeing them, like Fagin and everybody just like dancing together. And then when you get, I forget her name, but the one woman who is almost like a
Nancy.
mother figure to Nancy.
Yeah, Nancy.
When she's singing, and then they have like the big number just saying bye, where they're just like, we'll be back
soon. Yeah.
you know?
another act one closer that like is supposed to be like, all right, we're going to intermission, see ya, we'll be back soon. That in the movie,
Yeah.
I think this is an example where it works though, because they're like, we'll be back soon, but there's still enough other plot lines and threads to where you can just transition to the next. Because in the musical, it ends with Act 1 being "Be Back Soon." The Act 2 opens with "Who Will Buy," where he's like,
Yeah.
But I do think it's like a really good little Act 1 closer done in nicely in the movie.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love it. Like, for me, like, because I know sometimes in like musicals, like, how do you like translate it to film where you can't, like a big musical number in like a show, you can make sense to stop everything to like sing this for forever. That's like when we had Matilda the musical, the movie. There was a whole scene where they're like, they're singing the introduction to the school. We're going to tell you the rules about the school. And then like they have a whole thing where she goes, why? And then they tell like, I'll tell you why. Haven't you been listening to what I said? And then they do that again. And then I'm like, they just said that, like, why would she say that again later just because it's a chorus? And it's just like, it just feels weird transition to film. But yeah, I think it works so well in this. And it just feels like one of the classic movies with one of like so many classic characters, like the Artful Dodger, I think is great. I just love how it has a happy ending. I love the kind of I want that he has, where it's so sad because he's just like, I'll never know like my mother, kind of a deal. And that's really sad. But honestly, I think a big reason why I love those two is because Oliver, the character, he's a Paddington. He's just one of the sweetest little freaking kids I've ever seen in like a thing. And I just want him to be happy. And I think that oh God, what is the actor's name again?
Mark Lester.
Mark Lester just does such a great job at playing that innocence. And I think one of my favorite sequences, musical sequences, is I'll Do Anything, because I love how they do the thing where they make a car. You know what I'm talking about?
The little carriage.
So,
the horse-drawn
it's like
carriage.
so cool. How they're able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, those are always the most fun musical numbers. The Fagins gang, they call it, because the whole thing is that they collect all these little like trinkets and tchotchkes that like they like turn that into like their play space. Like they can kind of like put on these little musical numbers. Like I love Pick a Pocketer 2, where they're showing the different little pickpocketing style. Like it's just so clever, and I think it's one of those things that like, kind of like you were saying, Chad, like it's hard to adapt a musical to film because so much is lost that you don't get on a stage. But I think for a movie like, or a show like Oliver that is so wide sprawling, I mean, it's so chapter-esque because every single scene is a different location. It's like, oh, he's in the orphanage. Oh, now he's getting sold on the streets. Now he's at the funeral parlor. Now he's picked up by the Artful Dodger. Now he's with Fagin's gang. Now he's with the Brownlows. Now he's like everything. It's so chapter like driven that it usually wouldn't work for a movie because usually you want it to be a little bit more linear. But I think they make it work because you know the song, or even if you don't know the songs, like the songs are familiar, the characters are lovable, but they can now, the thing that you can get from a movie that you can't get on stage is you can actually now have all these different locations to really make it feel like this big epic thing that I feel like on stage, even it's like pushing a bridge on versus pulling a bridge off. That's a really cool way to like transform the scene, but it's like you don't get that full immersion that you might get in the film now that you can visualize, where it's like Funny Girl, for example, might be better on stage than it is on film because you don't necessarily need to have the big like sprawling Don't Rain on My Parade boat sequence. Here I think it aids itself to be a lot more sprawling, a lot more adventurous, a lot more of an epic, because the book also is a big thick book. There's a lot of book and there's a lot of characters, and I think that was the one thing I was worried that in rewatching, like, how do they balance all these characters? But they balance it pretty well. I think at times it's like, now we really want to tell Nancy's story, so everything else is taking a backseat. Oh, now we really want to tell Fagin's story. It's like hard to pick out who the lead of it is. It is Oliver, but I do think Fagin and Nancy have more substantial arcs in a way, and they do get a lot of the spotlight, but they do find a way to still interweave them well, which is pretty cool.
Speaking of Nancy, though, like I think that's like one of because it's like a good story because it's like she's like a toxic relationship and like she can't help but love Bill Sykes even though he doesn't give a fuck about her apparently. And then he like kills her, and I didn't actually know that he like killed her until later when it's like why'd you do it, you know, kind of a deal. And I feel like I wish she wouldn't have died like that, you know, that wasn't
I think it's
I
a play
liked her
on
character so much.
Well, because the whole story is a play on class as well, and I think it's supposed to
True.
show the fact that like where our societal class and our upbringing really affects the kind of longevity of our lives and our paths and how we go. Because she ends up in like a really abusive, toxic relationship, but that's because she's low class and that's all she has and that's all she knows. Like she sings that heartbreaking song "As Long as He Needs Me," which the message of it doesn't make sense because it's like as long as he needs you, like that's the only thing worth living is for a man's affection. No, it shouldn't be, but for her, that's all she has, and she has to cling on to that, even though she knows it's a toxic relationship. It's a really heartbreaking story. But I think that's also a great juxtaposition with Oliver's journey then to like get something better than just this low class and show that distinction of the separation. And then Fagin himself also kind of fleeing at the end, being like, I'm reviewing the situation and I'm out. Like, this is not the life I want either.
Such a good
you know,
song.
like, so what were you going to say, Chad?
I was just going to say, and then she gets to go on that arc where she helps Oliver and, you know, doesn't do what Bill needs her to do.
Yeah.
And I love that whole distraction scene.
But it all comes down to class in the way that all these situations and
especially like, you know, in I'll Do Anything, where they're kind of they are low class and they're like, well, this is how we survive is pick you have to pick a pocket or two. And then they kind of mimic the high society, like, oh, go lost, you know, kind of where they speak Cockney normally, which I agree and disagree. Sometimes it's very annoying, and then sometimes it is kind of charming. But I said sometimes it is kind of charming, but I do like how they kind of like they mimic the, you know, the proper, you know, darling,
British,
you know, kind of
dialect,
Yeah, Kelsey, you said this is like now like one of your like Letterboxd 4, like it's one of your favorite movies now. Like, I would love to hear your perspective though on Nancy as well, because you know she is a very complex female character, and I feel like, especially talking about Funny Girl now and this, I feel like it hits some similar beats. But I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that had Nancy not died, she definitely would have been on her way to, like Chad was saying, like she definitely had this redemption arc moment where she, you know, really sticks up for herself and, you know, defies Bill Sykes as hard as she can and goes and tries to help Oliver. And I think that she was really on her way of like really being truly done with him and not in a place where it's like, well, he needs me, so I'm going to be here. And she was like, no, like I'm not doing this. And you know, at some point, like during that whole sequence where he's like trying to get Oliver to go on like the job with him, she's like, no, like if you want him, like you have to get through me. And at the end of the day, like that ended up being what happened, unfortunately. But yeah, she's super complex and you just like really feel for her the whole time. I mean, she's like, you never really criticize her. Like it's so often times when we see like women in like a domestic violence situation, we always like ask like, well, why doesn't she just leave? And it's just like, you know, it's like not that simple. Like, first of all, the question should be, why are men abusive? But
right.
Of course we're gonna blame women first for everything. But you just really like empathize with her and feel for her the whole time. There's none of this like anger. Like I didn't find myself getting mad at her the way I was getting mad at Fanny Bryce for going after the boyfriend instead of sticking with her career. But I already said my piece on that. But overall, like this movie just feels like, it's, to quote Harry Styles, it's a movie that really feels like a movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just
it has a very
because,
cinematic
like,
quality to it. Yeah, it has a very cinematic quality. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And like the costumes are beautiful, the sets are beautiful, like there's so much attention to detail in every single aspect, and I just love the stark contrast to like the kind of like the downtown London, like where all the poor
slums,
like the slums of London, exactly. And everything's like black and gray. And then all of a sudden he wakes up in this utopia in Act 2 where literally every single house on the block is white. Like literally it's like a sea of like all these white townhouses, and everyone's walking around in these pristine, like nothing's dirty, like, and you're just like, whoa, you almost get whiplash. You almost have to adjust your eyes a little bit because you've been looking at like the sludge and the mud and the grit and the grime of the slums of London. And now all of a sudden you're just like, whoa, I didn't know that people could live this way in this setting. But there's like this entire there's another world happening right down the street. And it's all because like these people have money and you know, this other class doesn't. And it's really, really jarring. But also one of the funny things I wanted to bring up was as soon as they started singing "Food, Glorious Food," I forgot that like this is a real song from this show, because my most recent encounter with "Food, Glorious Food" is during a sequence in Ice Age: The Meltdown, where our characters are walking through this like gulch of where a bunch of what are they called? Hawks?
Vultures? Hawks?
Vultures. Yes. But
Gotcha.
where a bunch
I've
of
seen it.
vultures are hanging out, and they're looking at them, like licking their chops, being like, "Food, glorious food." And then like one little vulture is like, "Just picture a mammoth steak." And I like the song started playing in Oliver, and I was like, "Oh right, this is what that song
This is the basis of it.
Like I
That's
forgot.
cool.
I was like, "Hey, they took that from Ice Age: The Meltdown."
Yep, they totally did. Lionel Bart time traveled. That's very funny. I want to talk on the singing real quick, because I think the music is so great, so grand, so classic, so many classics in this thing. But my one big negative, and I think it's funny, I do agree, he has a natural sweetness and a natural like sincerity that can't be taught, but I don't know.
It, Dyl.
Mark Lester. Okay, he's not singing. He's not singing.
Bad singer.
He's dubbed. I believe it was the producer's daughter sang it or something. I don't know. But the problem is it's not very convincing. And I think for a kid it's hard to say like you're going to lip sync, or he's singing and not doing very well and they dubbed him over after the fact. It was one of the two. There's no real record of like, was he actually singing and he was that bad that they dubbed him over, or was he told to lip sync, or was he told that he was going to be dubbed? Because it's just some of the numbers, if you look, like, consider yourself at the very end, they're all dancing and it's so grand and so great, but he's in the front and he looks like he has two left feet. And I feel, and again, this kind of goes to what Chad was saying about the sincerity of it and the sweetness, and it's kind of endearing, but it's also like, it's a little distracting when like he's like just so clearly not a dancer, singer. Like, he's a sweet kid and he's a sweet presence, but like he's very clearly not as like refined as some of the others, which I guess could also aid to the commentary of the piece, of course. But like, I also think it's funny because he's kind of got like the noodle flailing arms a little bit, trying to do these dances when like what's his name, the kid who plays the Artful Dodger, Jack Wild, is really killing the dancing and really like nailing it, and he's singing. You could tell because his singing voice sounds like his speaking voice. Also, the thing is, the sound of his voice, like, or of the dubbed voice, they didn't mix it well enough to where it very clearly for me sounded like it was, even if you don't know if it is his voice or not, it's clearly sounds messed with, like,
it's
in terms
coming
of like,
from
audio.
somewhere else. Like,
Yeah,
it's not
it almost
coming
feels like
from him in the moment.
Yeah, it's like a godlike presence where it's like, it doesn't feel like this kid's singing. It just it feels very much, and this is something we talked about when we did West Side Story, Chad and I, where like it's very clear sometimes when some of the dubbing doesn't necessarily work 100% of the time, which is why I'm glad like nowadays in musicals we see so much like actual authentic singing, which like you don't need real singing in musicals, but it definitely helps, I think. And I think for Barbara Streisand especially, like, you can tell she's singing those songs, even though they've worked on it in the studio and stuff. But like here, it's like, I don't know. I think his singing's, or whatever singing it is, whether it's his or not, is not great. Plus, it's not mixed well to where it kind of gives this uncanny valleyness. Like, it almost creeps me out every time I hear him sing, because I'm like, oh, it's a little weird. It's like I'm hearing this like kind of soprano voice, which like makes sense. He's a boy, he would have a boyish voice, but it's just like, I don't know. It's very uncanny valley, and like, I'm admittedly not a Mark Lester fan for obvious reasons, but I think, you know, he's just I have trouble with the singing of it all, where I'm not a fan of him, and I think he does kind of drag some of the scenes down, where I think everyone else around him is so good that he's very sweet and endearing and you're rooting for him, but I think he's a cute kid, and that's kind of it for me in terms of like how I think of him. I don't think his acting is great. I don't think his singing is great, and when he is the focal point, I think it drags some of it down, which is why I'm glad later on in the film Fagin and Nancy kind of become the main characters, because they are much more like you're much more drawn to them than like you are with maybe Mark Lester. But I mean, I know Chad, you said you loved him so much in this, so I think it depends on perspective, I guess. But I think Mark Lester is a reason why this isn't like an all-timer for me, because I just don't think he's quite on the level of everyone around him. But it's also tough. He's a kid. Like, you can't really expect that of a kid. But we've also seen kids who, but we see Jack Wild, who is 16.
Jack Wild
when he
is a
does
kid.
this, but still, like, I think it can be done well. It's just, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of his performance, but luckily there's enough great supporting characters around him. But I don't know.
I think I looked it up because I was curious, and I think Mark Lester was 12 when he did it.
Really? He comes across so much younger.
Yeah, he looks like really young. But I have like two things to say about that, Dyl, because one, they couldn't find a kid who could freaking sing. Jesus Christ.
I mean,
this is
there
America.
are kids in the movie who can sing. Yeah, like, we hear it.
Number two, and if they were going to dub him over, get a kid who can sing to dub him over. Because the kid who was singing couldn't sing.
Yeah, it's rough, but
it was so distracting. This is the one element of the film that it like totally takes you out of it, because you're like, this kid sucks at singing.
That was my thing, is like
it
took me out of it a little too often to where I couldn't fully like immerse myself in it. But like, Consider Yourself is such a good number, and the thing is, like, it's mostly them watching other people, and that's the thing I think that they smartly did when they directed it with Carol Reed. Carol Reed, he realized, he was like, you know what? Let's have Oliver watching them dance. Like, let's not have Oliver dancing, because I think the movie's at its strongest when he's observing other people doing things and dancing, and that's where he is more endearing. He's most endearing in the scene work, with like Brownlow and with Fagin, than he is in the musical numbers. But Chad, did you have any thoughts on the musical side of Mark Lester's performance or his acting?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fine. It's one of those where I really like the movie so much that I didn't notice a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about. I did notice that his voice sounded like really high pitched and stuff, but I just thought that was his just singing voice, because sometimes like little boys can have like a really high pitched kind of tone to their voice when they sing. And I actually thought it kind of worked, because it made him sound more innocent in a way than if he had a much deeper voice or something like that. So I don't know. Maybe on rewatch I'll see everything you guys are seeing, because maybe I don't know if I notice like off dancing as much as you might, but
and again, there could be an endearing quality to that, where it's like, Oliver can't dance. Oh, that's cute. Like and that could be it.
That's true too. I also don't know that much as you do about Mark Lester. So, and even if later in life he became problematic or something, I don't think that has like really any bearing on him as a kid. But,
no. I'm not trying to hate on children or anything like that. I don't want to give that impression at all. I just don't love children. I just don't love the performance.
Put that on the record.
And I don't feel bad because I know Mark Lester and that stuff. But yeah, Kelsey, any what you had another thought on that?
My favorite moment that I thought Mark Lester did the best job was, funnily enough, in the coffin scene where he kind of starts beating on Noah, and then they trap him in the coffin. and also, sorry, side note, I didn't remember this guy's name at first, the guy who ran the orphanage. And like, I swear to God, my subconscious knew it because of how many times I've seen this movie as a young person. And I was like, oh, this is like the Bumble or something. And that's his name, Mr. Bumble. Anyway, but I think I was trying.
Comes back to you.
It was crazy. And so anyway, he's sitting on the coffin. And so he comes in and he's like, Oliver, are you in there? And he goes, yes, I am. And he's like, are you going to behave? And he's like, no, I'm not. Like, I thought that was the best acting he did.
Yeah, I honestly think he could be sassier in some moments. Like, I think there's a little edge to Oliver, at least in the musical, that I think is not always there in the film. That I would prefer, like a little bit more of just a little bit more bite. Because he does still have to like kind of fit in with this gang and get he gets a thicker skin from that. But I mean, he still has to be. He's naturally always going to be the most endearing of the bunch. So like, I wouldn't mind if he had a little more bite, and I love that scene as well for that reason. But we really like Oliver. It's a great show if you haven't seen it on stage, but it's a great movie as well. We're all fans. Anything else to add to Oliver? Exclamation point. No?
Why did they have to play the straw game?
What?
Like in the beginning where they're picking straws and then he has to be the one that goes up and asks for more. Like, why is that even a thing?
I don't know, Kels. It's the 60s. Actually, it's not. It's whenever he wrote the book, in the 30s. When did the book come out? Oh, 1830s. Whoa, that's old. Yeah, the
Holy
18
shit.
yeah, Charles Dickens. Yeah, it's an old
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Have you ever read Oliver Twist? I've never read Oliver Twist. I feel like an
No, because
uncultured
I feel
swine.
like
But
no, because Charles Dickens didn't cut a single word because he got paid by the word. So there's probably a bunch of words in that book that are unnecessary. So I
yeah,
don't want to touch a Charles Dickens
yeah,
book. He
like
needed
a
an
hundred.
editor.
100 pages describing the different handkerchiefs with boogers in them. I love how
Exactly.
I love the one scene where he's like, you got to pick the initials out with the needle, and there's a
Yeah,
couple
yeah,
extra
yeah.
little embroiderments, and he's talking about
See,
boogers in the handkerchief.
yeah, there's all those different like textural moments in this movie that makes you feel like you're there for some reason. Maybe I'm just having severe
It's
nostalgia.
very immersive. I think the
But
production
then
design and how he uses it is so good. Yeah.
also right at the end when he has his box of treasures and he almost makes it out, but then he slips and they fall into the sludge of the London street, and so he digs around in the sludge for a second. I was like, "Ooh, I'm having a visceral memory right now of this."
Yeah, love it. Oh, it's
Yeah,
so good. Yeah.
it's
Um
good.
Yeah, Oliver wins six out of the 12 Oscars it's up for. One of those is an honorary Oscar for choreography. So it was awarded its own Oscar because there's no choreography Oscar. It was also awarded picture, best director for Carol Reed, best score of a musical picture, best sound, best art direction, and then the honorary Oscar for for choreography. It's nominated for best actor actually for Fagin for Ron Moody, supporting actor for Jack Wilde, best adapted screenplay, best costume design, best cinematography, and best film editing. A great story
Oof,
about
so
great
deserved.
friendship. Yes, great friends. Speaking of friends, love that TV show. Who's everyone's favorite friend? Who's everyone's favorite friend? Kel-
Chandler.
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 Kelsey, do you have a favorite friend?
Phoebe. No,
Damn it!
that's so.
That's a
I
good
was
one.
hoping for the segue that someone would say Rachel. Get it?
Oh, I knew
That was
that's
my
probably
David.
where you were going, but I
I know.
couldn't think fast
Like, how
enough.
do you get from Oliver to Rachel? I was like, that's the most
And
unique
my
way I
I'm
could do it.
sorry, I want to clear the air. My favorite friend is Joey. I don't know why I panicked and said
No,
Phoebe.
Phoebe's a good choice. Phoebe's a good choice.
No,
That
Joey
was my
rules.
Ross. That was my Ross impression. Rachel. Anyway,
Mm.
Chad, tell us about Rachel. Oh, sorry, Rachel,
Absolutely.
comma Rachel. I need to put a
Rachel.
pause there.
Rachel. Directed by Paul Newman. He's not in this movie. Written by Stuart Stern. Cinematography by Gain Rescher. Music by Jerome Morose. Starring Joanne Woodward, James Olsen, Kate Harrington, Estelle Parsons, Donald Moffat, Terry Kaiser, Frank Corsaro, Bernard Barrow, and Geraldine Fitzgerald. We've seen her before. Synopsis: a school teacher in small town Connecticut, is that how you say that? Has a sexual awakening and gains independence in her mid 30s, based on the 1966 novel A Jest by God by Margaret Lawrence.
Yeah. So the only
Mm.
one that's not necessarily a play. It's funny when we were talking about Pixar characters. Paul Newman, voice of a car in Cars. There you go. But yeah, Paul Newman, directorial debut, one of the most renowned actors of the time, decides he's going to make a movie starring his wife Joanne Woodward in a career-making performance. Makes this movie, this vehicle that is the most progressive film of its time I've seen, but also has
Mm.
some of the greatest stylings of like the classic Technicolor 50s and 60s era. So I'm really excited to talk about Rachel. We're gonna start again with you, Kels, because I do think this is obviously a big feminist piece. You are a resident feminist here at
Thank you.
the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I would love to hear. This is the first watch for all of us, I believe, because this is one that I feel like isn't talked about much, but it should be. But Kels, what do you think of Rachel?
Well, first of all, I hope I'm not the only feminist on this
No.
panel
You
right now.
the resident meaning
Okay.
like the
Quintessential.
there we go, quintessential. Even though
Thank
we
you.
are all feminists here at the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. If you're not,
Thank you.
get
I figured.
out.
Yeah, definitely a slower start for me with this one,
Okay.
but I'm telling you, by the cult stuff, I was hooked. And I was rooting for this woman the entire time. I was honestly shocked. I was like, I didn't know that they like made movies about women in this way, like in the 1960s. Like
They
this,
didn't. That's the thing.
it
They really
felt
didn't do a lot of that. Yeah.
It felt like an A24, like, art house that would star, like, Frances McDormand, and, it felt like
Yeah.
not a movie that I would watch from way back in the day. Like, when I think about movies way back in the day, I think of The Lion in Winter and Oliver. Like, just
Mhm.
either big spectacle musicals or, like, the most boring fucking, like, nonsense I've ever seen. So, this was just, like, so creative, and I loved the flashes of basically her like daydreams or like her intrusive thoughts she was having,
Mhm.
which like I was like, holy shit, like I feel like I'm relating to this woman a little bit because she has one right in the beginning. This is going to get kind of dark. Her first one that she has right in the beginning is like she's having some kind of medical emergency on in the street on her walk to work, and for a second it's the first one, so you don't really know if it's happening for real or not, so you kind of it takes you a second to adjust to, oh, this is just a daydream she was having, whatever. But I literally wrote down, I was like, funny enough, I have the same thought every time I'm going to work too. So, where I'm just like, oh, if anything could keep me from entering this building that I have to be in, that'd be great. But yeah, like, I'm so glad I watched this, and I'm so glad that you introduced me to this one, Dill.
Hey, listen, you chose this slate. I'm glad you chose this
It was
slate to
meant to
introduce.
be.
But I will say, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. They didn't make movies like this back then because they didn't. This is a very progressive film for its time. And Chad and I talked with Matt on an episode a few months ago about it's called Peyton Place, which was similar. It was all about like kind of sexual awakening in a way and just like kind of breaking a lot of taboos and stereotypes. And this one does it as well. But I think what it does so well is not only just in the themes it talks about and the feminism and just this interesting character piece and the effect on like cults at the time and just this idea of sexual repression and awakening, but it's also the style is so interesting because I feel like this style we wouldn't see at least until like the mid 70s with like Cassavetes with like Woman Under the Influence or something. I believe that's the title. It's either Girl Under the Influence or Woman Under the Influence, but
Woman.
it is Woman, yeah. Woman Under the
Mhm.
Influence, which famously also Cassavetes made a movie for his wife to have this really awesome star vehicle. Rest in peace, Gina Rollins passed away a few weeks ago, but yeah,
Mhm.
just like this really really awesome kind of trippy. It's almost got like a psychedelic kind of. It doesn't have a lot of like kaleidoscopic kind of colorful vibes or anything like that, but there is like a way this is edited that makes it feel very kind of hazy and dreamlike, like the way they show kind of flashbacks to her childhood and the present day, and also just kind of showing the inner
Mhm.
turmoils of her head and the way she thinks and perceives the world, because this is admittedly a character who struggles to connect to the world and struggles to know what her worth is because she quite literally grew up watching her father like embalm these dead bodies, one of which was like her friend who was a twin of another boy that she ends up like seeing later in life, and that's kind of the central romance of this thing. But it's just
Mhm.
so fascinating to see like how this character's past informs her present and her fear of death every morning, waking up and being like, am I alive? Is this real? Am I living? Am I breathing? Am I having a heart attack? Am I dead? Like just these weird like existential thoughts that again like you don't get in movies at the time about women specifically, but just in general, the idea of like depression or suicide or anxiety, but also sexual repression and all that stuff, which is so like I feel like ahead of its time and just how it explores that while also not being like graphic about it either. It's very natural. I
Mhm.
mean, if anything, it's about a woman trying to establish for herself what the idea of love versus lust is, and the idea of, oh wait, this is something I am lusting over, not that I actually love. And she realizes that when it turns out this is not the guy, and this is not,
Mhm.
she's not actually pregnant. Like all these really fascinating things at the time that I think is just so ahead of its time. I watched this, I was like, this is a stone cold freaking masterpiece. I love this film. I'm surprised because I was like, oh, this is the only one that's not a play, it's not a musical, so I'm like, it'll be fine. Paul Newman, all right, actors turned directors. I wasn't a fan of Dances with Wolves, so I was like, maybe just another star vehicle like for him to like test the waters as a director. But I was like, no, Paul Newman is a damn good director, and his wife Joanne Woodward is a damn good actress, and this is just one of the coolest visualized progressive things I've seen of that time, while also still having great technical merits that you would expect from like the 50s and 60s with like Technicolor. Like this has the Technicolor from like Vertigo and West Side Story with all the colors and the way they pop, but it has the editing style and the writing and the edit and the cinematography of like the future of the 70s. So it's like this perfect little bridge, but I love it.
Mhm.
Chad, what are your thoughts on Rachel?
No, I mean I'm agreeing with everything you guys are saying about it. I don't know if I like loved it on the same level as Dylan, but it did definitely surprise me, and I'm glad because I bought it on Blu-ray, so you
Nice.
know I'm glad that I can
And I heard
rewatch
the restoration is
rewatch
really
this.
good, right?
It
Have
looked
you
really
seen it?
great. I don't
Yeah,
know.
because it
Um,
was famously kind of like not necessarily as seen as other movies. Like it wasn't preserved as like it wasn't as much of a cultural sensation, so it wasn't necessarily
right.
physically released a lot of places. But they recently did one. I think that's like very stunning. Yeah.
Yeah, and also because no, I definitely got what Kelsey was talking about with the A24-ness, and just felt like an indie film of the time, and just
Yeah.
like before like that like wave kind of like started to happen like the '90s or whatever, um, and I don't know, it just felt like really cool, like a really interesting story. I mean, it felt at times kind of like a horror movie because you do have these sequences in the funeral home and stuff like that. It's just like so disturbing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like seeing this little girl watch her dad, you know, with these like little kid bodies. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is getting dark, like really dark. And I'm almost like, Carrie, don't watch these parts because it's gonna make you sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you could just see like how, you know, growing up in that and just not probably not having access to like, you know, therapy and like, you know, her parents didn't seem like they were like that supportive of like, well, what is being raised around this going to do to her later? And then, you know, just seeing her as an adult where she's so closed off, and you know, she's like talking, she's like so morbid, where she's talking about like, I'm in the exact middle of my life and it's all
Mhm.
downhill from here. And I'm like,
Mhm.
fuck, dude. I'm like, Rachel, don't do that to me. I'm approaching that, okay? So like you need to calm down. We're the same age, Rachel. Um and you know, and then yeah, having like the daydreams, which I thought were really trippy, but kind of like cool, like that would probably happen in like a horror movie. Like Stephen King probably would have wrote something like that. Um and then yeah, and then you know, the whole church thing, and then the relationship and everything. I just like the thoughts of her like wanting a kid, and then having like a what she thought might be like a pregnancy, and it turned out to be just like something else, like a cyst or whatever. And you know, and then her just like inspirational thoughts of just like, I'm gonna like move somewhere else and just like grow from this and just like start over.
Mhm.
And you know, just anything can happen. And just like her thoughts of like moving on, like you're never too young to just start over and just be
Mhm.
like, now I'm going to learn how to live. And you know, just the thoughts of like, maybe I'll have a kid, maybe I won't, you know. And then there's a vision of her like walking with a kid on a beach. And then yeah, I don't know, just like a very sad movie, but then inspirational, I think, towards the end. And I loved how she felt like very like flat for a lot of the movie, but it was just
Mhm.
because she had no experience. And
Right. She's
you know,
such a
she
the describing word that
sheltered.
some people say. Yeah, shelter, but like also just like kind of like a wet blanket, just like doesn't really have
Yeah,
much to them. They're just kind of like a,
A
they
like
have
blank
an
slate.
yeah,
how they
blank slate. Yeah.
describe the actor who plays Simon in Love, Simon.
Yeah.
It's like cardboard.
Hmm.
But like, you know, but there's a reason for her to act like this, and then later on you get to see, you know, her grow a little bit more. I mean, because when she's like has that first romance, you know, you find out like she's like a virgin, and she's like in like her like 30s. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course,
Mm.
but you know, it's not something that she chose. It's like something that was kind of like, she was so closed off for so long that maybe she wouldn't have chose that if she
Yeah.
had lived a different life, had different parents and stuff like that. But I did also want to touch on really quick, you guys talking about like the whole psychedelic nature of it is just really cool, that this was probably the only movie in the slate to me that really felt like it was like a 60s going into
Mm.
the 70s type of
Yeah.
film, especially like when she went into the diner and like everyone was there, and then like you had like the hippie guy at the cult or the you know, the church, where he's like, everything's love, man.
It's very much of its time in a way that, like, Lion and Winter's a period piece, Oliver's a period piece, Romeo and Juliet's a period piece. Funny Girl is not necessarily a period piece, but it also has this like kind of classic golden age feel to it because it's
Yeah.
of an era, and it still is a period piece because it's about Fanny Bryce's life. So I think this is cool because it's like, this is the one that feels like plucked right out of the time, and because that was probably what a lot of women were experiencing at the time, was this kind of suppression, both sexually, just emotionally, connectively, but also religiously. And I think that's another element to get into in a sec because friend of the channel, Matt Chapman, co-host Framework, did want to bring this to our attention, like just the kind of religious subtext of it as well. The idea that overall aiding in this kind of idea of impressionable, the idea that she's so impressionable, that you have these guest preachers coming in and basically finding those that they want to like kind of prey upon and try to like convert. It shows how like easily manipulated people could be at the time too. Just the fact that they wanted to belong to something because they didn't have anything. They don't know what it meant to be a part of anything. So yeah, the first time you have sex, you think, oh, I'm going to marry this person, when that's not true. First time you have a little pregnancy scare, you're like, oh my God, I want to be a mom. Like the first time this guy says, oh, there's this new religious thing you should join, like, oh, I want to be part of that. Like it's not necessarily, it's not really brainwashing, but it kind of is. But it's just more so just this innocence and the shelteredness and this unknowing and this impressionable nature of just like, sure, yeah, like sign me up, because she just doesn't know better because she hasn't had any of those life experiences, which I think is just so fascinating. It's so fascinating to see her navigate this world, and then kind of like what you said at the end, like kind of take it by the reins and say, this is my life, I'm going to do it. And dare I say, this is kind of a very kind of early of its time, but before its time, but like kind of a pro-abortion or pro-choice message as well, in the way that it's like, maybe it's for the best that I wasn't pregnant. Maybe I could dictate my own life. I don't necessarily have to go through with this. It's definitely not spoken, like it doesn't tackle abortion head on, but it could be a really interesting example of something about like a woman kind of just making her own decisions and realizing that it's not all about just like get married, have a kid, jump right into it right away, especially when you haven't had that time to grow, you haven't had that time to play necessarily, and just like kind of be a young person navigating their 20s or 30s, so I think that's a very interesting subtext that I think nowadays you could also take from it, this idea of like, women kind of dictating their own paths and not letting others and society kind of dictate them for them, which I think could be kind of indirectly but also kind of directly parallel to like just abortion rights and women's rights in general, which I think is very, very interesting, and again ahead of its time for sure.
You also have like this coupled with Lion and Winter. This slate in particular seems to just have a lot of like, I don't know if I want to say like pro LGBT, but like, she has kind of like a little kiss with her like friend, her like teacher cohort, and she's trying to figure out what that means and stuff like that. So and then of course you had the Anthony Hopkins thing and stuff, and it felt like a lot of like repressed, because maybe Rachel doesn't feel that way, but like her friend definitely did, at least a little. And so that's kind of another like progressive theme that it had too, about exploring that side of things. And no one's like, even though she might have like pushed back initially, kind of a deal, like she still loved her friend and she was still like that's great and stuff. So it didn't feel like either movie was really saying that that's wrong, but like of course in Lion and Winter it's like more frowned upon at that time, but it felt like there was still like a pro message for it, I guess.
Well, and there's something to be said about the kiss too, where she immediately does shy away from it, because I think that's what she has been taught, in a way.
Yes.
Of like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to, oh wait, this is taboo, this isn't allowed. But then also like, but I'm kissing someone, I've never felt that. Like, what does that do for your body? Like, just the endorphins. It's like kind of like that double-edged sword of like, this is wrong because society tells you it's wrong, but like I like it because it's the act of doing it, not necessarily that she is queer or not, but like just that idea of just like, oh, this is what it's like to kiss someone,
just like human contact.
It's really fascinating that like even if you take the queer subtext away, like it still is just about human connection, as you said, Kelsey.
This movie's really interesting, Dyl, because in the beginning you really don't know where it's gonna go, because you kind of just like, you're going through like just a day in the life of this woman, but then all of a sudden she gets invited to come to this church service, and so I literally wrote down, I was like, is she about to join a cult? Like, let's get crazy, because I just didn't know like which direction it was going to take. It's like, oh, is this woman going to find herself religiously? No, she didn't like the cult. It kind of freaked out a little bit. And, you know, runs out hysterical, shares this kiss with her friend. And I was like, wait, crazy jump. We just went from cult to lesbianism. Oh my God, is this going to be a queer awakening film?
Right.
And then she kind of, you know, she rejects that and is like, no, that's not me either. And then you kind of like figure out along the way, it's like this woman is like coming after into challenge after challenge after challenge of like all of these different aspects of things that want to define her, like the religion wants to define who she is, her friend wants to define who she is, this man wants to define who she is, and it all leads up to, and then, you know, like you said, Dyl, like her having this possible baby will then define who she is, and then it all leads up to her kind of figuring out like, no, I'm gonna figure out who I am, myself. Oh, her mother is also a big part of it. Holy, she did a great job, that actor, because I disliked her so intensely because, you know, from the get-go, it's easy to, like you guys were saying before, it's easy to kind of, you know, say that Rachel's like very quiet, a blank slate, like, you know, is very like a very plain Jane, if you will. But really, like, she kind of like has her own quirks about her right from the beginning. And you can see that this is a very awkward person, you know, how she does like the shadow puppets right in the beginning. And, you know, she's like this grown woman sleeping in her childhood bedroom. And so, you know, she kind of does have this like this quirkiness about her, which drew me in right from the beginning, because I was like, oh, this is a woman that I know, that I'm familiar with, that I might share some qualities with. Like, so you find yourself rooting for her right from the beginning. And I'm kind of immediately I've been making the comparison between her and Nancy in my head, from Oliver, because with Nancy, you don't root for Nancy because you feel bad for her. You root for Nancy because she has a strength about her where you're like, oh, if anybody can get out of a relationship, like, it is this woman. Like, she just needs to take the step to get out of it. And with Rachel, it's the opposite. Like, you do kind of pity her a little bit.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a bad thing, but, you know, you want her to make a change so bad throughout all of it. But like towards the end, like when she did think she was pregnant, like I have never like rooted for, like, if that's where I think a story is going to go, or if someone has like an accidental pregnancy or a pregnancy scare in like any book, movie, TV show that I'm watching, I am like, it gives me hives like thinking about it, because I'm not in a place to be having or around babies at all. So like, if it happens to a young person on screen, I'm like, oh my God, I hope she's in a state that like she can get this like solved. Like,
it's a big thing. Yeah. It's
you know what I mean?
Very big thing. Yeah.
But for Rachel, I found myself being like, oh my God, like this would be a great opportunity for her just to like have like not necessarily a purpose, because you don't need a kid to have a purpose, but like, I don't know, it just felt like a direction that she could go in. You know what I mean?
A way she could grow up in a way, like
Yeah.
now's your chance. But I also think that's interesting because you start to get that with the romance too, and you're like, okay, good, she met someone, like this isn't gonna be the love of her life, but like just the fact that she's able to like feel free and have these adult experiences, that's awesome. But then as soon as he pulls out the picture, it's like even he can't get over this thing that's happened in his childhood, and essentially that is by extension her, because then that all cycles back to her watching her father embalm this kid, and it's like she can't even be in this relationship because it has some sort of connection to this past that has tied her down to where she needs to just go. And I love that about it. I think it's tragic and it's sad, but like I love how she does make that stance to go, because it's like no matter what she does, if she's where she's at, she's never going to escape the trappings of her past, in a sad, unfortunate way. But that's true for a lot of people. You just need to sometimes get out to feel the world and see the world, and then you can always come back. But I think you need to leave to know. And I think that's why people stress why college is such an important thing. No matter how far away you go, but just the idea of just being somewhere else and having a different community that's not necessarily married necessarily to your home. That's why people stress education in general, even like high school and grade school. Just the idea of a few hours of the day spending it with other kids and teachers that aren't your immediate family is an important thing. And like homeschooling is great for those who do it, and I advocate for whatever method. I mean, education is great, period. But I do think there's something to be said about like that's why we have summer camps. That's why we have, that's why all these things happen, because they're trying to get these kids out of their shells, so then when they are adults, they don't feel so like bottled up, which I think is fascinating. But
yeah,
you brought up the picture scene, Dyl. I just wanted to get your guys' opinions on, because that's the same scene where she is like in a post-coital kind of like cuddle session, and she drops the L word on Nick. She's totally like, I love you. And I literally was like, oh God, Rachel, why
she doesn't know better. She thinks
like
it's
I'm
love.
Cringing.
That's what she thinks it is.
Yeah.
It's
I
lust,
wanted to
but
know if you guys had any like hard opinions on that, because I remember watching it and I was like, oh God, what's she doing?
I get it.
Well, I mean, it's also kind of like that's kind of how the 60s were. It's like everyone loved everything and everyone and stuff like that too. So in the time period it doesn't necessarily mean like I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But like maybe like, oh, I love, like, especially like maybe that was really good sex and she's like, oh, I love you, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
I could see where Dylan also, like, she's so inexperienced that maybe she thinks that's what you're supposed to say.
Yeah, and not even that, but you can genuinely feel,
or
like,
she thinks she feels that.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of like younger media about younger people, you'll have like a first kiss and be like, I love you, and it's like a whole joke, like, okay, like, he doesn't love her, it's just he loves the idea of like kissing someone, or but I think when it's an adult, it's a little bit trickier, because it's like, he is very advanced, like he's clearly done a lot of growing, even though he holds on to that part of his past. She hasn't. So like when she says it, it's like, I think there is an honesty there. I think she genuinely thinks like, I love this, she loves the experience. She doesn't love him, and I think that's the thing. But because he is the experience, she loves him. But it's not love in the way that like other people understand love. It's the love of the lust, if you will, which I think is very, very fascinating. Where like you could play it for laughs in a different circumstance, where it's like, a kid gets his first kiss in 6th grade, and he's like, I'm gonna marry her. Like, you see that, and it's sometimes played for laughs, but I think it's more tragic in the sense because she hasn't necessarily had that relationship before, and it's a little sad, but it is relatable. Like, we've all kind of been through our first loves sometimes, where you might say it and not know that you don't mean it, or maybe you do mean it, but like sometimes you say it because it's like, no, this is it, I'm in love, I have a girlfriend, like it's just very interesting. I've seen it with people firsthand and secondhand. Like I've experienced it, the idea of just like, I mean, think about in a cinematic context, if you've never seen a movie before and you watch, like, let's say you put on like a Rotten Tomatoes 30% movie or something that's like not really that good, but you put it on the big screen for someone who's never seen a movie before. So someone goes to see Madam Web, they've never seen a movie before, they leave going, that is freaking amazing, what did I just watch? And then when you watch like a dozen more movies, you realize, oh, okay, that wasn't really that good, but like I'd never seen a movie before, so like, what, I didn't know better. That's kind of what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. Yeah. Like, if you were to sit an alien down and show them a movie, they'd probably be like, whoa, that blew my mind. But if you show them 10 other movies, maybe that first one isn't as mind-blowing, but you still love it.
That's a good point. I just wanted to, no, I mean, it's a good way to, I was like, where's he going with that? Oh, okay, cool. But I
was proud of it.
I did
good old Dale analogy.
I did want to say, because Dylan was talking earlier about, how she like finds her way and stuff like that, or she goes off to move to a different location to find herself, and I do think that is the best ending that the movie could have had. And then another thing that Kelsey was talking about that I wanted to touch on really quickly is the idea that because she's like, she plays it very flat a lot of the times, like we're talking about, because that's how she is, the sheltered personality. But in her mind, she's way different. And like, she is the quirky. And it's like, I love that she has those daydream thoughts that you get to see visualized, because at first it's jarring, but then you kind of like get on board with like, oh, I understand what's going on right now. So like, real life, she does something, but in her mind, she's doing something else. Like that one time she's like starts kissing that guy's hand, and you're like, oh, all right. And then there's the one part where, she's got to like tell that kid to go to the principal or whatever. And then she's almost like, I want to save this kid. He did nothing wrong. I don't know, just like stuff like that, because in my real life, every single time, like I have a weird thought that just enters in, and then I'm just like, why did I think that? No normal person would ever think that. That's
An
so weird
intrusive
that I would ever
thought.
think. Yeah. And then, like, you realize other people have that too. And you're
Yeah.
like, what if I just do this? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
something really crazy or weird. And then you're just like, other people think that too. It's kind of cool.
And I'll say right
Yeah.
now, I know narration is a very cheap way out of exposition in movies, and I think that's why a lot of people say, "Oh, this has narration. It's stupid. It's unnecessary. Why can't you just tell it visually? Like, why do you have to spell it out for us?" This is one of those movies where I'm like, the narration makes it. It fucking makes it. It fucking rules because of those intrusive thoughts, like Chad was saying, because
Yeah.
the Rachel that is presented to the world is different than the Rachel in her head. So of course
Yeah.
the narration is so cool because it's such a dichotomy with the character we're seeing. I could go on and on, y'all. Like, I love this movie.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Just because it's such a surprise, because I had no idea. And maybe it's like that lust thing. Maybe I won't love it as much a month from now, but I love it. I love it.
I'm kind of interested in this and Dylan's love for this because, like, this had like a lot of similar vibes to like Peyton Place, but I remember you had some issues with that, even though you did also like it. But this feels like, I don't know the last time this has happened since In the Bedroom, when you're just like,
The
found
movie
a
in the
movie I
bedroom, just for
love.
people who haven't watched the
Correct. Yeah,
2001
the
pick of
movie.
this. Yeah. Chad's like, this hasn't happened since the bedroom.
Since
Like,
the bedroom.
What are
Remember
you
that
guys
time,
doing in the
Dylan?
bedroom together?
No, like, let me rephrase. No, but yeah, this is exactly that, where I'm like, I had no idea this existed, and now it's like an all-timer for me. I think it's a great directorial debut for an actor to like make that jump to directing and being so good as it is. I think the difference between this and Peyton Place, I think I love what that movie stands for, but I think stylistically, I think this just tells the story better than that, even though I think both stories are vital. So that's kind of the difference for me with those two films. But yeah, it's so good. And I just want to bring up, I know she's probably not going to be any of our picks for Best Actress, but Estelle Parsons is always so good. She always has like a few little scenes and steals the show. She plays the friend, Calla Mackey, in this. She was also in Bonnie and Clyde, and she has like a few scenes where she just kind of screams, and she won the Oscar for it in 1967, a year before this. But she's like a little smaller role in Bonnie and Clyde, stole the show, won an Oscar, and here she kind of does the same thing. She just kind of comes in, steals the show in her few scenes. So I just think this is a great cast, great film. Yeah. Anything else, y'all? Anything else on Rachel? Kels?
I was afraid it was going to be one of those films where, she doesn't end up making the jump to make a change in her life, and she's kind of just stays content in her very mundane existence. But so I just felt so satisfied at the end when she does, because I even feel like leading up to her getting on the bus, I think it feels like there's a moment where she might not do it, where she might not make the jump. And then she does. I literally said out loud, I think, like I was like, "Oh, get on that bus, girl, get on that bus." And she does. And so it's a very, very satisfying, weird, kooky, kind of spooky story.
Yeah, Halloween's coming up, y'all. I wouldn't say it's quite there, but if you want something that's a little haunting, but definitely way ahead of its time, but also of its time, but also harkening back to a great era of Technicolor. I love it. Rachel, though, is only nominated for 4 Oscars, but it doesn't win any, and it's sad. But it is nominated for Best Picture, Best Actress for Joanne Woodward, Best Supporting Actress again for Estelle Parsons, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Talking about something so new with 1968. Now we're going back to something so old. The classic, the Bard himself, doth William Shakespeare. Chad, tell us about Romeo and Juliet.
Sure. Romeo and Juliet, directed by Franco Zeffirelli, written by Franco Brusati, Marcelino D'Amico, and Franco Zeffirelli. Cinematography by Pasqualino de Santis, music by Nino Rota. Starring Leonard Whiting, Olivia Hussey, Michael York, we've seen him before, Bruce Robinson, John McHenry, Keith Skinner, Dyson Lovell, Richard Warwick, and Laurence Olivier. Synopsis. I wrote this one. 2 young schmucks fall in love, but are doomed by the hatred between their families. Based on Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare.
Yeah, it was funny because you were like written by, and I was like, wait, who are these people? And then I realized, yeah, they wrote the screenplay. But I mean, it is William Shakespeare. They don't
Right.
change any of the text, but they did trim stuff down, obviously, to fit what is it, 2-hour movie. So yeah, the screenplay is by other guys, but it is essentially William Shakespeare through and through. So Chad and I have had an interesting journey with Shakespeare. This is only the second Shakespeare movie proper we've covered. We've also covered West Side Story, both versions, but we've covered Henry V. From
That's right.
1946 or 47 or 44. I forget which of those 40s years we covered, but we covered that one. We haven't really covered much other Shakespeare, so I'm very interested to hear Chad's journey with this piece of Shakespeare. And then Kelsey and I, not famously, but in our own lives, we watched this movie together for the first time in Miss Baker's class in freshman year of high school.
Shout out
I
Miss
feel
Baker.
like it's very interesting. I don't know if the curriculum, how it works this way, but like we learned Romeo and Juliet in 7th grade, and then you learn it again in 9th grade. It was very interesting. But 9th grade, yeah, we watched this film in our English class, which gets a little risque for a freshman year high school class, but it's also famously, if it's not Kate Winslet in Titanic, this is also an example a lot of people go to as like the first boobs I ever saw was in English class watching Romeo and Juliet, and I feel like that's kind of the only talking point people have for this movie nowadays. But they're ignoring so many other great things about it as well. But let's start with you, Chad, because I know Shakespeare. We've had an interesting journey with it. We've both. I loved Henry V. I liked Henry V. You hated it. West Side Story I loved. You didn't love it, but then the remake of West Side Story you loved, and I also loved. So we've had an interesting journey here with Shakespeare. But I'd love to know, as someone who hadn't seen this before I throw it over to Kels, what did you think of Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet?
I still have far to go because I didn't really care for this one all that much. I don't know. I just have a problem. I think like my favorite kinds of Shakespeare adaptations are the ones that aren't directly tied to the source material, to where it is like a West Side Story, or it is like, something that is just telling like more of a modern type of story, and not using the diehard cold hard oldie English of William Shakespeare, and like having the fluff on it and stuff. And it's just like, even with I know Dylan wasn't going to bring it up, but the Romeo plus Juliet, even that, it has like a modern spin on it, but it still uses the language. And I'm like, guys, that's not the thing you should be changing. You should like actually use like real language that you would use today, so that and this is where I'm like the Kelsey that's like, I don't know if I'm smart because I'm like I can't connect with this material with the language that they're using. However, I did buy the No Fear Shakespeare edition of Romeo and Juliet, and I read most of it and then listened to the audio of the rest because of timing. But I got more of like what the story was because I mean, it's a classic story. It's going all the way back to the 1500s.
Yeah, and it is West Side Story. So like you kind of at least have that basis of like you understand it's two rival groups. Boy loves girl, but their families hate each other, and what that brings.
But I'm just talking about like the intricacies of the story and stuff. And I got a little bit of it from like the visuals and like what they were kind of saying and stuff. And then reading the actual like original story where I'm like, oh, these people are like 14 years old, getting married, having sex, and there's also so much talk about, sex and like rape and just all this stuff in the actual story that I'm like, this is crazy. So I'm glad that it doesn't have a lot of that in this. So they have modernized it a little bit. And then I like that it's like an Italian filmmaker shot in Italy with a lot of Italian actors. Was really cool.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
A cool, like kind of twist on it a little bit.
Because you just went to Italy too, so I'm sure it was like, the scenery. You were like, yeah.
Because it's like a classical like English story, so to see it like an Italian take on it is kind of cool. Also, I have a little bit of a mix with this because I like that they used really young actors to play the really young characters. And the one that, I've been, saying a lot looks like Zac Efron, that I just couldn't like
it's the hair
divorce myself from.
Hair and the blue eyes. Yeah.
But also it's kind of weird because when I was reading about it, the two main actors did a lawsuit because they were like, they filmed us naked and they showed it and they didn't tell us they were going to do that. And
Right.
so then it's kind of like it gets into a
Oh,
little bit of like child
Yeah.
endangerment with this.
The child consent laws are very interesting also because it was an Italian production. There's a lot of interesting nuances there that I'm just unfortunately not as
Yeah.
well researched about. But yeah, I definitely think it's valid for them to stand up because they're in their I want to say in their like 60s or 70s now, and so like they are of the age where they can really advocate for that, especially now at a time where you're able to come forward about that kind of stuff. Zeffirelli, he was an Italian filmmaker of the time. Like, I don't think he was trying to like say like, oh, I'm going to exploit these children's bodies or whatever. Like, I'm sure at the time he wasn't thinking anything of it, but it is something worth being critical of. And I think that is the one
Yeah.
element that we can definitely shame this film for, whether you like it or not, in terms of the language or the atmosphere. Like, it's very, very important to critique that. So I'm glad you brought that up because, that's kind of the idea of separating art from artist. And it's tough when you hear that they felt uncomfortable about doing these scenes. The only thing I will say is that the scene is brief, and at least it is, I think, a little bit more tasteful than like you would be led to believe if you heard the story. Like, you don't see them
Yeah.
having sex. You don't see it's very much the postcoital wake up the next morning. It's a brief flash because also code at the time you couldn't show a lot. It's kind of like The Graduate. There's like a quick flash. But again, it is something, and I do think it's worth noting. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think ultimately I could have gotten into the story and liked it more if I could have understood what was going on most of the time
Gotcha.
and the little intricacies of like what they're actually saying. Although I did really enjoy, some of the performances, and I liked how they portrayed like the, falling in love at first sight and the, famous like balcony scene and
Mhm.
stuff like that. I think all that was done really well. Although I will say some of the acting I thought was not as great at times,
Okay.
especially
mm,
with like Juliet and the fake crying.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah.
I was like, "Oh Lord."
Okay.
mm.
I
No,
more on that
I'm glad.
later.
No, I'm glad you're standing by your opinion. I always appreciate that about you, Chad. Kels, I will throw it over to you because I know we've watched this obviously in English class, but I don't really know how you feel about Romeo and Juliet. I mean, obviously we're theater people, we love Shakespeare, but I'd love to know what do you think about Romeo and Juliet? Because admittedly, this is not always heralded as one of his greatest. I mean, it's one of his most popular because I think it is also one of the more accessible and one of the most easy to kind of reinterpret in a modern lens in terms of like very easy star-crossed lovers, two rival families. It's a very easy template. That's why we've seen like West Side Story and things kind of envelop on those themes. But admittedly, it's not necessarily like one of his masterpieces like Hamlet or Othello or Macbeth or anything like that. But what are your thoughts on Romeo and Juliet and then also this film adaptation of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I really feel for Chad when when he's talking about all like the language and stuff. It's definitely really hard. I didn't understand or appreciate Shakespeare until like literally my junior year of college because that
Mhm.
was when I took my first Shakespeare class.
Yeah.
And so you kind of really need someone to like really break it down for you before you can kind of like really grasp it. And it's just and yeah, and it just comes across like kind of just like annoying and pretentious, where it's just like just say a thing, you know? Don't like
Yeah.
I was rewatching a scene before and he was like, "Can you not conceive?" And he's like, trying to be like, "What, you don't know what I'm saying?" So it's just like, it's
But
just like little things like that.
that's how they talk though.
I know, but I feel like I don't know, Shakespeare was kind of like just, fluffing
Yeah.
it up a little bit just to like
Maybe.
be poetic. But anyway, not that I'm saying like it's yeah, but I'm just saying like I empathize with what Chad is
Yeah.
saying. Where it's
No,
just like
I
kind of
100% do too. Yeah.
it's
I
Well,
do
tough
think
to
it's a very alienating
especially
language
yeah.
at the top if you don't have the context or don't have the, experience. Yeah.
well, because I was also going to say, especially because we watched a movie that takes place in 1183, and they weren't talking like that. They
Right.
were talking clearly. So, like,
That's true,
it,
but it
it
wasn't
makes
written in
sense.
1183. It wasn't written then.
True.
That's the difference too. And I will just correct it really quick. It does actually the play does take place in Italy, so it's written by an Englishman, but it is set in Italy based on Italian characters. So
Yeah,
Romeo.
that is intentional.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay.
Yeah.
it's in
Just to clarify.
Verona.
Yeah, but the English is the
True.
style is still the old English, the
Yeah.
speaking
Mercutio.
language.
You're right.
Yeah,
You're right. Okay.
Mercutio,
Yeah,
Benvolio.
so
Montague, Capulet.
I mean,
I don't know.
I think that this entire story kind of relies on the connection and the chemistry between Romeo and Juliet. And I think that these two like really really nailed it. Like my favorite scenes, like literally the only scenes that I really really loved were the ones that were between them. Like the entire balcony sequence is like so great. And so I think that I had the same problem with Romeo and Juliet that I had with Funny Girl, where the whole act one is great because it's about them like meeting each other and falling in love and coming up with this plan to be together and to get married, and then it ends with them getting married, and then the entire second act it just like totally falls off for me because it's like not, you don't see them together as much. And so this like initial like chemistry and spark that they have together like really fades by the time act 2 comes, which is unfortunate because like that was like in my opinion the best thing about it was like watching these two young people fall in love. And I did Google it because I was like, because I was also afraid. I was like, I'm definitely watching two children right now.
Yeah.
But I was more afraid that there was going to be some insane age gap between the two of them, and that she was, because she looks really young. She was 16 when they filmed it, but she just like read so much younger than me. I thought I was going to guess like 13, 14, and I was afraid he was going to be like 18, 19, 20, and I was going to be like, oh my God, this is horrendous.
Yeah.
But
I believe she's only a year younger than him.
Yeah, they're only a year apart. They were 16 and 17. So that personally made me feel a little bit better just knowing that. But yeah, they really carry it, and that's kind of what the whole story is about. So thank God for that. And then follow-up character like the nurse is also a delight to watch throughout it.
I love the nurse. Yeah. I think the thing with Romeo and Juliet that I think people sometimes misunderstand is they're always like, it's such a tragedy. It's so beautiful, romantic, and so tragic. And there are elements, but I think when you view it as a comedy, it works a million times better. When you look at it as, like Chad said, two schmucks where you're like, these are the most stupid kids and they're doing the most stupid stuff. And I think when viewed in that lens, especially with Mercutio, where he's telling the whole story about Queen Mab, which is like just some of my favorite stuff in cinema, but like his whole monologue about like Queen Mab and just the idea of like jumping into relationships too soon and don't be taunted, like I think that is where the movie's at its best, because it's literally everyone else trying to work around these two stupid kids who are like clearly drawn by lust and not love. It's the same idea we were talking about with Rachel, where it's like they're young, they don't know better, they think this is true love when it really isn't. It's not. And I think that's what makes it so tragic, is the fact that they literally take their lives because of their lust, not even realizing it. But I think there's also a humor in a way of just the silliness of the premise of these two kids who are, from rival families. I think there's something really nice to be said about that. The fact that it can like bring families together by realizing, shit, look what we did because we're feuding. Look at what this mess we've made. But also like, they're so stupid, but I think that's also so endearing. I think that's what makes it relatable too, because we were all those young kids in love that made stupid mistakes and like maybe snuck out past curfew and all those little things that are so relatable. And yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from, Chad, with the language, because it is obviously a hurdle to jump. But I also think like hopefully with more watching of Shakespeare and reading of Shakespeare, like it just becomes a little bit more accustomed. It kind of reminds me of like when you learn how to like read music and like play music. It's like eventually the notes just it becomes like muscle memory in a way. You play the notes on the page, you don't have to think about, is that a C or is that an A or is that a B? But the first times you're learning it, it's very daunting, like learning how to read music and reading any language, really, like learning how to speak another language. It is another language in and of itself. And I think that's the thing, is it's like, yeah, you change it to make it, something more digestible, more modernized, but then you're also losing what is true to the text and also true to the language. And I think for me, the language is what makes it beautiful. I just love hearing the way they talk. I think I am very, very grateful to have gone through Shakespeare classes and like learning what this language actually means and approaching it in a way that I can understand it. But like, there's so much great humor, especially with Mercutio's character. There's so many great lines. This is just filled with some beautiful, beautiful dialogue. And I think just the way they say it, I think this is one of those movies, especially because it is such an easily accessible Shakespeare play in comparison to so many others. And I think they did a good job with this with Tragedy of Macbeth recently as well, is that like, even if you don't necessarily know what they're saying, it's very clear with the way they're saying it, what is going on. It's very clear when he's confessing his love that he's confessing his love. You don't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs of what they're saying, but you know, like, this is his labor of love that he's pouring out. And when Mercutio's being a wise ass, you know it because of the way he carries himself. And I think the nurse, especially with you said, the humor of it, like, I think a lot of that is well done through the performances to really emphasize the language, to make it accessible when it's not. And I think that's something that this film does really well, that I think is really powerful, at least to me. But I understand, like, if you're starting at more of a square one, like, it can be alienating, and I totally respect that, and I totally honor that. But I do think, at least for something like this, they do such a good job at least visualizing it and conveying it. Like, just the fact that he leaves the balcony and he keeps coming back because he needs to kiss her one more time, and he keeps coming back, like, that stuff, like, we don't need to see we don't need to know what they're saying. We know what's going on. He just doesn't want to leave her because he loves her and he adores her. You know, like, that's the kind of stuff that I appreciate about this, is that it's visualized in a way that I feel like you could still understand what's going on without necessarily understanding every single piece of it. Though I respect it. I think, you know, Shakespeare's always going to be alienating, you know, at first glance. And I do think this is something that I'm glad I've studied in 7th grade, 9th grade, and then again in college to, like, really get a full grasp of, because I love it. I love the language. I mean, this is, spoiler alert, a top 50 film of all time for me. This is like my favorite version of this film. It is a film I watch all the time. I love, and I just adore it down to my core. I think that love sweeping, beautiful musical score alone, if you were to just put a black screen in front of me with no dialogue and just play that score for 2 hours, I'd be a weeping mess, because I think that score is just so freaking beautiful. And that love theme is just so hauntingly gorgeous that I'm like, that alone, I would give it the Oscar. You know, like, I really just think it's such a beautiful score, but also just a beautiful piece on love, but also really funny when you look at it as the context of, like, these stupid kids just, like, fucking shit up because that's true. They don't know better. And I think West Side Story also hits on that too as well, with all these other gangs feuding, and they're just like, come on, they're so stupid. And I think that's a point of it. I think that aids to it, but I don't know. Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, I think that's why when you have something like West Side Story, like, that's why those stories are so good, is because they've said, you know, we don't need the flowery language to do this. Like, I understand where it's like, well, it's poetry. Like, if you take away the poetic language and, like, the diameter of all this stuff, you know, you're taking away something that works. But then you're like, oh, but you have to go take a class and you have to be taught how to watch this movie.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, if it's inaccessible in that way, then it's not for everyone. It's for specific people who have been taught how to watch the movie. And then I'm like,
let me just pose a question, because I'm not disagreeing, but, like, is Parasite a bad movie if it doesn't have subtitles?
I wouldn't understand it, so it probably wouldn't work as well as it does with subtitles.
Okay, but it's still the same movie. Is my point. Like, I think it's one of those things where maybe
if they had like an English, like a No Fear Shakespeare, like, subtitle on the bottom,
like a translation,
I could get down with that actually. That would probably make the movie more accessible to me.
That's fair. Yeah, I just think it's very interesting to think about, because, like, it's one of those things where we think about it with, like, silent film too. Like, does film need language necessarily to work? Can it just be done with? I mean, we think about 2001. How many scenes of that have no dialogue at all? It's just atmosphere and visuals. And I feel like, to an extent, you could portray a lot from that, just from emotion and power of feeling in a way. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just an interesting perspective to think about.
I definitely get that for sure, but, like, then you were talking about, like, a whole thing. You were like, the speech that this one character gives about a Queen Mab or whatever, and then you're like, that's my favorite part of the thing. And then I'm like, I didn't understand a word that guy was saying.
Interesting.
So I couldn't. How do I know the story, like, and what it even means? Unless I can't even remember if I remember that from the book, but I would love to get into that lane and watch it from that perspective, because I do love, like, Italian cinema, and I'm not trying to, like, disrespect the movie or anything like that. I know you love it, a lot of people love it, and I have heard that it is the definitive version of, like, that story in cinema or whatever, or, like, particular, even though I probably would prefer, like, a West Side Story myself, but, like, that, like, you know, stripped away from it, using the actual real language and whatnot. But I don't know. I just couldn't connect with it, unfortunately. I wish I could have.
That's fair. What I will say that I appreciate about you, Chad, and you're a good friend for this, is you are at least trying to engage with the material by going out and at least getting the No Fear Shakespeare, at least trying to engage. I think there's a lot of people who would just say, I didn't understand what they were saying. This movie sucks. And I think there's like
Yeah.
something admirable to be said about like you wanted to go through the effort to at least try to get a grasp for it. Because it is one of his more accessible. I think slightly more accessible is Midsummer Night's Dream, which we'll also get to in this show, in this series, eventually when we get to the 30s, when we go back in time a little bit. But I do think there's like an admiration I have for you that you at least tried to tap into it, at least engage with it in a way, even if it still doesn't necessarily click with you. And that's all I can ask as a good friend. Like, I'm glad you did that. And I thank you.
And
yeah,
hopefully I'll grow with it a little bit more, get it on Criterion and watch it more and try to engage with it a little bit better. The one thing I do want to say that I did really connect with when I actually listened to the cleaned up version of the thing with the No Fear Shakespeare, is that there's a part where Juliet is thinking about going to the tomb and like pretending to be dead and everything, and then she's just sitting there like, I'm gonna be like next to the bones of my ancestors, and this is really scary. And it almost feels like it could be like a horror movie in a way. And I wish they would have like dived into that better. And then also, if I could have like understood what she was saying during that too, it would have really creeped me out and I would have liked it a lot more.
I mean, they do have like the crypt with like the bones.
That was pretty creepy. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, the ending is haunting. It is the fact that she's like, I'll pretend dead so my family can get off my back, give me a funeral, and then I can just run away and be with this guy. But then he's like, shit, she's dead, kill myself. And then she's like, well, fuck, now he's dead. Now I gotta kill myself. Like, it's really sad, but it's also kind of like, you idiots. Like, I think that's why I think if you look at it as a comedy, it honestly kind of works as well as a comedy, because these are kids. They don't know better, but they think they do. And then I think that's kind of an interesting irony to it. But Kelsey, do you have any like favorite moments or favorite parts?
I think the balcony scene was my favorite part because I always think of it as kind of like so boring in my head, where she's just like, Romeo, Romeo, where art thou, Romeo? But it's like, it's actually so much more like messy and clunkily and juvenile and fun. And I think like that was my favorite thing about it in general, is that they were still very much like two very young people, just like, talking like very regally, if you will, but still being so youthful about everything that they were doing, and still, like, I don't know. There's just this one part where it's like he like goes to go away, but then he's like, no, I need one more, like one last kiss. It's like he literally like attacks her face, and she's just like, oh, okay, like you really have to go now, like go. And then it's just like it was like kind of silly. So it's just like way more entertaining than just like reading it on a page, because I feel like my only like relationship with Shakespeare is like before acting school was like reading it, so like it was so boring, and like nobody knew what was going on, and you're just like sitting there in English class just like miserable, and then you kind of like get a better understanding for it later in life. But so I didn't realize how fun it was my point. And it actually is a lot of fun.
It can be fun. Yeah. And again, I don't think you necessarily need a class to teach it, but I do think at least like even taking in other material, like watching Lion King before you read Hamlet could just at least help clarify some elements of that, even though they're very different. But like I do think the fact that we do have like these modernized interpretations of it do at least help us engage. Like I think you wouldn't have even gotten the whole like feuding families necessarily if you hadn't even had West Side Story, which I think is like kind of a cool way to kind of use the material we can access to kind of help us relate to the older stuff and help us tap into it. I also think seeing it live also helps as well, because you just get like a sense of the liveness of it helps as well. I saw King Lear with the late great Glenda Jackson, and Pedro Pascal was in it as well a few years ago on Broadway, and it was just exceptional. It was so good. And that was a story. Did you see it at the same time?
Pedro Pascal was in that?
Pedro Pascal, yeah, he was the Prince Charming, if you will. Yeah, that was before his Last of Us. Yeah, that was early Pedro, but yeah, like that was an example of a play I thought was dense. His historical stuff, admittedly, is still very hard for me to tap into. I love his more like romantic or comedic stuff better. Like Twelfth Night is great, Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet. But when it gets into like the real like history stuff, unless it's like Henry V, which we covered on the show, but like I do think King Lear was always one that was hard for me. But then having seen it live, I'm like, I get it so much more. So it just really depends on where and how you access it, and what point in your life as well, and how you can tap in and relate to certain characters. I think the nurse becomes more relatable as we get older. You know what I mean? As the woman who's just trying to be like, we got to figure this fucking shit out because your family and your family, we got to figure it out. And I love how they play on that in Shakespeare in Love as well in the '98 movie. How
Yeah.
Imelda Staunton kind of plays the nurse in that, and they kind of mirror the balcony scene in a way. They take a lot from this in that film as well. So that's a film I think, Chad, you do like. So some of the old English works better than others, I guess. Yeah. Thoughts on the score?
I thought they modernized the language in Shakespeare in Love.
They do, but I feel like a lot of it still stays true. It's a bit more of a hybrid. It's not as full as like West Side Story, but it meets somewhere in the middle, I would say.
The
But like,
score.
yeah, the score. What do we think of the score?
I don't remember the score that well.
Oh my gosh. Did you hear
I
that?
mean,
The sound of my heart breaking. No,
I thought it was beautiful.
yeah, I mean, I actually sent a video of myself playing the piano in the Discord, in our Discord. No one acknowledged it. No, it's fine. I love the score just so much though. So please give it another listen because it is it just like makes my heart melt. I love it. I just love this film. And I get it. I get the criticisms, but I just think it's just for me just one of the best of its kind. And it's not even the best Shakespeare adaptation there is, because I don't think this is the best Shakespeare play, but I think it's just the best version of it that I've seen. Like pure version. I still like the West Side Story Spielberg a little bit more, but this is still like just so good. Cool. All right. So Romeo and Juliet nominated for 4 as well, but it wins 2. It wins for costume design and cinematography. Well earned, I think. It is also nominated for Best Picture and Best Director from Franco Zeffirelli, a legend. All right. So now we get to the fun part where we get to rank these films, and I honestly think this is going to be kind of a very diverse ranking, because I already know some movies are higher on my list and lower on others, and I know some movies lower on other people's lists are higher on mine. So I'm very curious to see where we go from here. But Kelsey, you're the guest, so you're going to tell us first, what is your number 5 film?
My number 5 film is The Lion in Winter.
There you go. Chad, what is your number 5?
Romeo and Juliet.
All right, my number 5 is going to be Funny Girl. So Kelsey, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is Funny Girl.
All right, Chad, what's your number 4?
Funny Girl.
Okay, and my number 4 is Lion in Winter. Kelsey, what is your number 3?
Romeo and Juliet.
All right, Chad, what is your number 3?
Rachel.
All right, my number 3 is Oliver! Exclamation point. Kelsey, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is Rachel.
All right, Chad, what's your number 2?
Number 2 is The Lion in Winter.
All right, and my number 2 is Rachel. All right, Kelsey, that means your number 1 is
Oliver.
Chad, your number 1 is
Oliver.
And my number 1 is Romeo and Juliet, which means I think with Kelsey putting it at 1, Chad putting it at 1, and me putting it at 3, that beats our 2-2-3 for Rachel. So that means Oliver, it won the Best Picture at the Academy, and it's winning our award here. Oliver is the Best Picture winner here on Picture This, getting a combined score of 1, 1, and 3 for a total whop of 5. A great score there for that. So now we get into our acting prizes, which is also very fun because we get to now award some of the performances that may or may not have been awarded by the Academy. We get to talk about 6 of them, which is very, very exciting. So we're going to start with Best Actor, and I believe, Chad, you start us off with Best Actor. Chad, what is going to be your Best Actor of this slate?
This is very tough because there were some really good ones for me. But I had to go with one that I just thought like floored me the most, and it's Anthony Hopkins from The Lion in Winter.
Nice. Okay.
Dude, like I said, like he reframed my mental state and enjoyment of that movie, where I was kind of like on Kelsey's wavelength, where I was kind of bored for a while. And I was like, I am not gonna vibe with this at all. And then like when I found that like depth to his character, where I'm like, he's gay, but he's like, he has to be closeted and all that stuff. And just like that, the looks that he has when he's afraid that he's about to be like outed or whatever. And then, like the couple parts where he's, yelling at his father, like, you never came to me, and you never, like you didn't want me to be the guy or whatever. Whatever he was complaining about, he was like complaining super well. And I was like, I saw the future Anthony Hopkins, the star who would end up like, winning Best Actor so many times and just giving us some of the most iconic characters ever, like Hannibal Lecter and all that. And holy shit, he floored me. So, and that's saying something, because there were so many great like male performances in that movie, let alone the slate. And then other just great acting too, because we're talking about a lot of great actresses soon as well.
Yeah. It's very interesting with that, because he famously didn't win for us for The Father. We went for that year, we went Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal, and what's his name for Coda, Troy Kotzer. No, that was a different year. That was Daniel Kaluuya for Judas and the Black Messiah. Either way, he did not win for The Father. He only won for Silence of the Lambs. But with this win, Anthony Hopkins joins our Picture This Hall of Fame, so that's pretty cool. He is officially a member of the Hall of Fame. It makes sense. He should be in there. So I am next, and I didn't think I was gonna go this route, but when I think of like my favorite performance, and I'm not talking about like the best, because the best performance would probably also be from that movie Chad is talking about. But when I think of my favorite, I think my favorite performance is Jack Wilde as the Artful Dodger in Oliver. I really just think he has such a perfect understanding of that character. You have to love him, but also understand that he's a little brat, but you also love him so much. He's so cute and also a little bit devilish and a little annoying, but also endearing. He's just the perfect blend. I think his singing is great. He's someone who very clearly used his character voice and his singing voice to create like a real authentic character piece at that age, which he is 16. I thought he was much younger. So it's not as impressive as if like a 10-year-old did it, but still like 16 years old getting that nuance. I mean, he's the same age as Romeo and Juliet, which is like pretty cool. But like I think he really is doing such a good job. Consider Yourself is a great number. I think partially because of him, just his energy he brings to that movie too. Because up till then it's like you were the funeral parlor and you were boy for sale, and he's singing his operatic voice, and then it's like, "Hey, I'm the Artful Dodger," and it's like, oh, we're waking up now. There's a jolt of energy in this thing. So I really like Jack Wilde. I think he's great. So that's gonna be my pick for Best Actor.
It's a good one.
Yeah, Kels, you're up. Who's your Best Actor?
That's really, really good. Jack Wilde was definitely on my list still. He's also just like the most kind of like, he's so funny because he's kind of the most mature person in that movie.
Yes.
Like he almost seems like the most put together, like compared to Fagin and like Bill Sykes and like all these other adults. Like he really just like has his shit together the most.
What's his name? The Artful Dodger. He dodges shit. He's a scallywag, but he does it
right.
artfully. He's very composed, and that's something to be said. He's the artful one. He's the slick one. You know? And he's also the inspiration behind Billy Joel's character in Oliver and Company. So there you go.
There you go. Say less. Need we say more about him?
Why should I worry?
I was worried. I wasn't worried about Chad taking this guy because he didn't like this movie, but I was worried about you, Dyl, and I wasn't trying to tip my pick a little bit. No. I wasn't trying to tip my pick when we were talking about Romeo and Juliet, but I think this was the best acting performance that I've seen in all 5 movies that we watched for this. Like, this guy just blew me away. I was hanging on every single word, eating up the entire performance, and that is John McEnery as Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet. Like, he had such an understanding of the role, of the language, of the vibe of it all. Like, he really just was the standout for me, just like in that movie for sure, but in across the board, like just really, really, he had a lot to chew on with that role, and you could tell he was living in it.
Yeah. It's funny because I think that character, you can either make him a complete clown or make him like that kind of know-it-all kind of asshole, but he kind of finds a blend where he's endearing, but he's also a bit of a snooty little bitch, but he's also like really charismatic. And when he dies, it's sad because it's like he milks it too. Because at first they're like, "Oh, come on, Mercutio, stop fucking around."
Yeah.
He's like, I think I've been stabbed. And he's like got this kind of like weird air about him, and then he just drops, and you're like, holy
Yeah.
shit. And I think honestly that's kind of how Riff is in West Side Story as well. Like you like Riff more than you like Tony, and I think there's a reason why Mike Feist was such a standout in that film, you know, because it's like and in the original movie as well. I forget who played him, but yeah, I think it's just a great character. The fact that you get him only in the first like half of the movie, his presence, it's one of those things kind of like the Mahershala Ali in Moonlight. I always bring it up where it's like he's only in a little bit of the movie, but his presence is felt throughout. And if you notice, I said it's a comedy, but as soon as he dies, that's when it gets super serious. And that's kind of where you were talking about, Kelsey, where you're like the second act doesn't hold up as much. And I think the reason is because Mercutio, the voice of reason, the one who is trying to say like this is fucking stupid, dies. And then what is lost? All the joy, all the innocence, you know, it's all just lost. It's all just
You're so right,
drab
Dyl.
and miserable. I think it's great. I agree with you. I think his performance is great. Yeah. Chad, do you have any thoughts on John McHenry's performance?
I think I remember it, but I'm not sure.
You remember the performance?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because he probably doesn't remember who Mercutio is.
Yeah, no, the
all
blonde
the characters
guy. The blonde guy.
kind of blend together in that movie, except for Michael York, because I knew who that was.
Gotcha. As Tybalt. Yeah, Michael York's very good in that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Kels. Your best actress. I think this is stacked as well. So I'm interested. I'm happy with whatever you take, because it'll take at least something off the board for me. But what are you gonna do with your best actress?
I think I'm gonna have to go with Miss Streisand.
Right.
Gotta scoop Barbara for my best actress. I mean, she is the heart and soul of that movie. She's the reason why you stay until the end. Because like nothing else really compares. Like no other storyline, no other performance in that movie really compares to what she is doing. Like she's doing it all. She's giving you comedy, she's giving you drama, she's singing her heart out. She's doing it all in that one. So it would be, I think, sacrilegious of me not to pick her.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's an all-time performance. I have nothing really to add. I mean, we talked about it.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's just such an elegance and grace. And as Chad said, like the fact that you could sell me on Barbara Streisand being ugly, you can't. And I think that's where the movie falters a bit. Yeah,
it was my number one as well. She's just so funny in that. Yeah. But I had 3 solid ones, so don't worry, I got one. I got another one.
I was gonna say we still have some backups to get to. This was so tough for me because there are legitimately, I think, 4 performances that I could say are the best of that year, and I don't even think you could say one is better than the others. It's just which is my favorite performance, and I think because this character, similarly to what Kelsey said in her pick, nails this character so well to where you buy the fact that she is youthful and in love and just so smitten, but also you understand that she's so young and immature at the same time. And the crying that Chad hinted at is so over the top, but also so it feels so right for what she's going through in her age and the type of the way these teenagers act. I'm going Olivia Hussey in Romeo and Juliet. I think she's so good. It's my favorite. I shouldn't say that because Rachel Zegler, but like it's one of my favorite Juliets I've ever seen. But actually Rachel Zegler's going to play Juliet on Broadway in a few months too. So Maria and Juliet. But yeah, she's my favorite, like just proper Juliet I've seen. Just so captivating. She's young and she really brings forth that innocence and that beauty and elegance. But also, like I said, there's those moments where she acts like a little immature baby, because they're kids. They don't know better. And I think there's something that she just nails. And when she's in love with him and they have those moments together, I totally believe it. But when she's like screaming, throwing tantrums, I believe it. Like I understand, you know, I've lived with women my whole life, you know, going through the teen years and the trials and tribulations. I understand. So yeah, I love Olivia Hussey so much in this movie. And I think she's my favorite performance of this slate as a whole. Like it's my number one of all the performances of any of these movies, though I do think there's some solid backups, and Chad's going to probably take one of them, which means one of the 4 is going to get left off, which sucks, but there's only 3 spots. But I do want to champion Olivia Hussey for my favorite movie here. But she's great. I love her. Yeah. Cool. All right, Chad, you're up.
Good pick, Dyl.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chad, you're up.
Yeah, my pick is which I thought this was going to be taken, and I'm glad it wasn't, because Katharine Hepburn is my pick.
Yeah, iconic.
Yeah, I thought she's the clear number 2 for me, just because I mean she tied for the win, and I just think it makes so much sense because like in that movie she's doing so much. Like when she needs to cry, she'll cry like a bunch of times, but you know, you never know if it's like manipulation crying or if it's like real, and it's like both and different times. It's like one or the other. And the way she is manipulative of like the sons, but also the husband, and just the way she like delivers all those lines that I quoted, that I just thought like, she just really brought it. And seeing her in this movie, because I didn't connect with like so long ago when we did, I did not really connect with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the movie itself. And that'll be like a rewatch at some point to go down more of a Hepburn kind of like train road, because I really dug her in this, and it kind of connected for me more about like seeing like going back and seeing a lot of her like earlier performances, and seeing why she's known as like one of the greats. And I feel like she showcases it here really well. And yeah, I don't know, like all my acting comes from this movie.
It's great acting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say with that, I thought Katharine Hepburn was going to join our Pictures Hall of Fame, but this is the first time we've awarded her. She didn't get it for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner because that came out the same year as The Graduate, so we gave those performances the win there. And then we didn't give it to her for what's the other film she was in? Sorry. Oh my gosh. On Golden Pond. We didn't give it to her there either. So I'm very happy that she gets her first recognition here, though we will talk about her in a few months again.
Yep.
So she will be at least in consideration again. But with Kelsey's pick, Barbara Streisand joins our Picture This Hall of Fame because she won for Prince of Tides. So she is now a 2-time winner. So she joins our Hall of Fame here on Picture This, which is very exciting. So we've indoctrinated Anthony Hopkins and Barbara Streisand into the Picture This Hall of Fame. That's pretty freaking badass. So I will recap once and for all our best acting. My pick is Jack Wilde from Oliver. Kelsey's pick is John McHenry for Romeo and Juliet, and Chad's is Anthony Hopkins for The Lion in Winter. Our actress prizes: my pick is Olivia Hussey for Romeo and Juliet. Kelsey's is Barbara Streisand for Funny Girl, and Chad's is Katharine Hepburn for The Lion in Winter. And our best picture for the year of 1968 is Oliver! With the exclamation point, it is our best picture. And it was the best picture at the Oscars. So there we go. 2 awards for Oliver, 2 for Romeo and Juliet, 2 for Lion in Winter. Can't complain. It is a little sad that we couldn't fit Joanne Woodward on here. I think she was like my clear number 2.
She was
behind
my
Olivia
third.
Hussey. So yeah, so another great performance. Just so many great. I mean, the women in the slate, even the woman who played Nancy and Oliver. I'm blanking on her actress name, but fantastic female performances across the board, and some great male ones as well. So yeah, that is 1968. Any last thoughts before we close this chapter? A very versatile slate, despite being all musical play adaptations in one book. Like, I think there was still some great variety. Classic literature with Oliver, classic Shakespeare. You also get like a traditional kind of just great meaty actor play with Lion in Winter. You get a fun musical with Oliver, and then of course Funny Girl, and you get a more modern take with Rachel, which I think was really cool. Rachel. I said and, I don't know why. Any last thoughts on this slate, Chad?
Well, like one day we'll find a Shakespeare piece that I can connect with and understand and actually enjoy. But we'll see. Maybe I'll come to your side at some point.
Hey,
but I will say
Rachel Zegler's doing it on Broadway. If you want to give it a go, see it live. we can maybe she'll sell you. I don't know.
I don't know about that, but I will say this was a mostly great slate, and we don't always agree with the Oscars as far as like what was the best picture. And even though we had to overrule Dylan a little bit, we did this year. So that was really cool, and it was also just really great to have Kelsey as a guest, because I don't know the last time I actually laughed this hard in a Picture This episode.
Yeah, that's basically him saying that I am a Rachel blank slate, and it's fun.
All right, everyone stop hating on Rachel. All right.
No, I'm just saying I don't give Chad that emotional and humor stimulation that
you do, but it was more with Kelsey.
I know, I'm kidding. No, our resident funny girl, our resident feminist here, our Queen Supreme, Kels. Did you have fun with the slate? And what were your final thoughts as we wrap this chapter up?
I had a lot of fun. I'm so happy to be here. I'm very happy to do this with you guys. This is a really, really solid year. I'm really glad that I picked the year of 1968. I knew I was onto something when I saw Funny Girl Oliver and Romeo and Juliet all on the same roster. I was like, oh, 3 titles I'm familiar with. Let's get it. So
Yeah. There you go. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, and you can see Kelsey every week on Marvel-ous Movie Mondays. That's the greatness. She's not just a one and done. You see her every week, which is awesome. We do have to tease next slate though, and we are going back a decade to 1958. We're going to have another friend with a first initial of K who has never been on the show before. Carly Perkins, big fan of the show, a big fan of the channel. We're really it's always a thrill to have her on draft day and other places, but she really wanted to be on Picture This. And we said this would be a great opportunity to talk about a classic year. And she picked the year of 1958. I love it because the guests are kind of like picking their years, which I think is important. I think it's cool that they get to talk about what they want to talk about. So the slate of 1958, it contains the films Auntie Mame, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Defiant Ones, Gigi, and Separate Tables. So it's going to be back-to-back months of musical winners for Best Picture. So that'll be pretty fun. Chad, have you seen any of those going into?
Yeah. As we've talked about recently, I've seen The Defiant Ones.
Oh yeah,
because
that's right.
a shared Discord that Dylan and I are in, we once did a Sidney Poitier, whole kind of deep dive after he sadly passed away, and we covered a lot of movies, and then that's when we got to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and stuff like that. But now will be my second time seeing The Defiant Ones, but I'm also excited to get to the other ones I've heard things about but have never seen.
Cool. So that's the slate. Carly will be on to talk about it next month with us for 1958. Otherwise, here are my and Chad's socials down there. Well, ask you first though, Kelsey. Where can they find you out there? Where can they, if they want more Kelsey, where can they go?
You can find me on Instagram, Kelsey A. Kilpatrick. You could check me out on TikTok, Kelsey A. Kilp. I've been posting a lot there. Oh my god. I almost knocked over my water bottle.
I saw your Bachelor TikTok today. It was very
thank you. Thank you.
You know how you can submit a friend? I will be doing that for you. Don't worry.
Oh my god. Please, everyone,
pick her ABC.
Flood ABC with my Bachelor application, because the guy who's going to be the Bachelor is so cute. Anyway, or you can follow my letterbox, Kelsey A. Kilp.
Yeah, let's hope none of that romance doesn't end like any of these 5.
Chad, yeah, no, please.
Chad, where can they find you?
Here most of the time, but also check out Cinema Chad is my channel where I rank stuff. I try to do reviews and stuff like that sometimes. And then also check out Welcome to Primetime, where me, my wife, Carrie, who you've seen a couple times before, and my buddy Hunter, we talk about horror movies all the time, and we're about to embark on our 61 days of primetime. It's actually the first time we've done it, even though we have been doing the show for a little while. And we're excited. It's a little daunting because it's a lot of movies, but we're also very excited to see a lot of horror that we haven't seen before. And also we're doing like our decades bracket series where we're going through all the decades trying to figure out what the best horror movie of all time is. Ooh. And we're very close to that. Nice. And as soon as we get through all the decades, we're going to do like a whole championship series of brackets and stuff like that too. So, and then if you love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, check out a lot of our series of that where we talk about that show and all the episodes. So
nice. Yeah. And you can find me here as well, Dyl Pickle Movie Network, if you're listening on podcast. Thank you. We had a little bit of a snafu. Spotify bought Anchor, so we had a little bit of a connective issue. But now our podcasts are out there. You listen to all of them, at least all that we had since the podcast launched. So we haven't put the old episodes of Picture This on there, but everything since then is now up to date, and this one will be on there hopefully when you're listening to this as it airs on YouTube. But if you want to go to YouTube, check us out, give us a like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Help this channel grow. This is a great show, and we are very fortunate, but it is the most time-consuming show we do on the channel because we have to watch 5 to 10 movies every month. So make it worth our while, and just give us some love, some likes. Even if we're not monetized, your involvement and your engagement is what makes us love doing what we do. We would do it anyway, but it makes us even more fulfilled when you watch along and comment along. And I've seen a lot of people that kind of carry on and like start to like watch the movies along with us, even if they're not guests on the show, which has been really humbling and really amazing to see. And it brings a tear to my eye and a warmness to my heart, which, this episode, we've had our controversial differing opinions, but at the end of the day, we do this because we love talking about movies and we love discussing it with one another. So thanks for watching. We have something cool planned for next year for Picture This, a theme like the year of classics. We're doing another themed year next year. But also for Halloween, I'm doing my 31 days as well. Kelsey will probably do her 31 frights, I assume. And I'm doing something a little different this year with it. More on that a little later. And Kelsey and I always do our little Halloween special on Marvel-ous Movie Mondays, so check that out as well. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next year for more, or sorry, next month for another year, 10 years back, 1958. You don't have to wait too long, but we'll see you next month for that. And thank you guys so much from Chad, Kelsey, and Dylan. Good night, and thanks.